welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And today I'm using a makeshift tripod that doesn't have the right top for my camera, so I'm like doing a bunch of makeshift stuff over here, and I only have a small cord that can only go to my tower, so I have to do it on this side. And I have my microphones aren't here because why? Well, my luggage that had all that equipment in it is still following me from Egypt. So I'm making do with what I got, and so the quality won't be as good, but you know, it's doable. And I got Dr. Adair here, and what's going on?
Not too much going on here. Good stuff here. Of course, my sleep schedule is slightly disturbed by having to get up early to see the lunar eclipse this morning, but beyond that, everything's fine.
Yeah, I'm just coming off of an illness that I caught on the flight back 3 days ago. It was pretty bad for 3 days, and now I'm starting to feel better. So if I look a little sweaty, that's because I'm still coming off of it and drinking lots of fluids, but I feel good enough to do this, so we're good to go. But
all right. So the lesson is, everyone to the audience, always stay indoors, never go out with other people, just sit there and just watch YouTube videos indefinitely.
Just wear your mask all day inside your house. Don't. But yeah, planes are pretty risky though. They really are. I took the risk. You know, I'm alive, so what are you gonna do? But yeah, the topic at hand is this recent video I did about mythicism, Richard Carrier, and I just felt like I wanted to do a video about it because, you know, I used to be a mythicist. I still think mythicism is a fine position to have. It's not the consensus, but I have a lot of positions that I hold that are not consensus, and I hold to them. But I also say, oh, this is not the consensus. And I also try to understand why the consensus thinks what the consensus thinks. I don't then go out of my way and say, oh, they're just a bunch of idiots. I'm right. I'm the big brain smart guy here. Anyways, getting a little ahead of myself because, you know, I noticed that some people, Dr. Carey, for example, he just doesn't play nice. Like he attacks people who disagrees with him, who don't like mythicism, for example, like Litwa, and, you know, attacks their credentials, says that they're secret believers, they're theists, and they're liars, and they shouldn't have PhDs. And so, you know, I've been learning about mythicism for a long time now, for a good 2 years now, like really learning why they think why this mainstream consensus is that there's a God. And I've been really like digging into this because I used to be a mythicist, so I know why. Like I know that I know the answer to these things. I know what the data says and what's the likelihood of certain things. Not saying all of it is guaranteed to be right, but I just know, like, I get why people say what they say. So I felt like doing a video and just going over the certain things that I think mythicists say that are just ridiculous, like the Jesus and Philo thing. I think it's ridiculous. It's the first thing I talked about. You know, stuff like Jesus ben Damnius is really the guy that was the brother of James. Everyone just missed that, except for mythicist A and mythicist B. But everyone else just doesn't know. They just forgot or something. Stuff like that. And so, you know, there's a lot that we could talk about. But yeah, where do you want to start?
Well, I think we should probably start at maybe a high airplane level and then kind of zero in on the stuff that was related to the video and also why you made the video in the first place. And I've also did a blog post as well, trying to summarize what has been happening for the last couple of weeks with things. But first, high level, I think everyone in this audience knows about mythicism. And I think everyone knows also that it is considered definitely a minority view, if not a straight up fringe view within biblical studies. Can you find people that say it's at least plausible, worth looking into? Yes. But yeah, you're going to find at least 9 out of 10 biblical scholars say, of course, there was a dude. And if you ask why there is, well, yeah, there is lots of prima facie evidence that you can point to that would say plenty reasonable, because saying there was a dude is not an extraordinary claim. So when somebody says, hey, there's these 4 gospels, there's these letters by Paul, there's this mention in Josephus, there's mention in Tacitus, and you're like, okay, that's a lot of mentions for just a random dude. Obviously a dude that becomes important, but it doesn't seem like that should be extraordinary. So if someone said, all right, definitely was a dude, that seems totally reasonable. Of course, once you dive into all the evidence and all the nuances, then you find out all the little problems. So like, yeah, there are 4 gospels, but they're all basically kind of riffing off each other. So instead of there being 4 sources, you start with one, and then you see how everyone is changing that for their own theological purposes. And like, okay, this isn't so clear anymore. The Josephus stuff, it's like, well, there's been arguments about that for centuries, how legit it is or not. That obviously complicates things. What is Tacitus talking about? What's his source? Is he just copying what Christians are saying? And so all he's doing is repeating the Gospels, and so it's not another source. Again, all of these little details, and that you can imagine it would take years to learn all this stuff, to debate all this stuff, to ultimately move the needle to all this arguing, all this hot air is ultimately to come to a conclusion that's just basically more than less one way or the other. It's not so fantastically strong one way or the other. And that's really maybe why there's so much heat, because if it's so, the needle is so close to 50-50, everyone's going to try as hard as they can to move it just slightly in their direction.
Yeah, I guess I'm irrationally emotional over a random response video. A random response video, 2-hour video about just attacking someone's credentials over their opinion on the Isaiah Ascension. To me, the person who's emotionally, attached to something, like what idea am I emotionally attached to? Historicism? Is that an idea that someone can actually be emotionally attached to? I don't give a shit about Christianity. I'm not fighting for Christianity. All I care about is truth. And when I see people bending the evidence and like ignoring facts and twisting logics and doing all this crazy shit, and then saying there's a big conspiracy against me, against my position, because, and it's funny because think about this for a second, Caitlin, think about this. Both Christians, fundamentalist Christians, and mythicists both say that academia is corrupt. Why is that? You ever thought about that? Only mythicists and fundamentalist Christians say that academia is corrupt. How can that be? How can it be that only both those opposing viewpoints think the same thing about academia? Doesn't make sense. Only it makes sense because they both have positions that are fringe and that are not accepted, and so they get mad about it. So who's the one who's actually irrationally emotional about something? Might want to look into that.
I would note, though, that I think you are definitely feeling angry because of how you felt Carrier responded to Litwa, because it seems like
Absolutely.
you and Litwa are pretty close. So
I could see why those insults Lit was a real scholar. Lit was a real scholar. Lit was not just some guy with a blog who charges $150 for you to come on his show. Lit was actually writing books and translating text and teaching and doing all sorts of stuff, adding to the canon of scholarship. He's not just writing conspiracy theory books. Like the reason why people criticize On the Historicity of Jesus so much for its so-called peer review is because in that book, like a peer review, for example, if I have an idea and I want to argue an idea based off evidence that's already established, I can get a peer-reviewed book. Here's the evidence that's already established. Here's what I'm arguing based off that evidence. Boom, boom, boom. This is my case. But in this book, he has like 20 different things that are not there. Like the Jesus Ben Damnius thing is not there. That alone should have its own peer review, but it doesn't.
Well,
the Philo Angel thing.
I think we want to pause for a moment, though, there. That is something that Carrier did actually get published in an academic journal, his argument about, you're specifically talking about the James character in Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews, book 20, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Carrier did actually write an article and get that published in, I forget which journal, but he did publish that in a peer-reviewed journal, and then he cites that on Historicity.
So the Jesus Ben Damnius is the Jesus that was called Christ, the brother of James.
The the part about him being called the Christ, that is Carrier's argument that was a basically a marginal note that was then added into the regular text, which is something that frequently happens in people writing marginal notes and people accidentally copying those marginal notes into the main text. That's Carrier's argument, and like I said, he did get that published in a peer-reviewed journal. So that actually has gone through that process.
Okay. So I want to see that, first of all, but I was just throwing up examples of shit that that in this book that people just look at and just don't come away with. Like Paul's ambiguous it's so strange that Paul uses this language. No one says that. Like nobody's actually arguing that. Where is he getting that from?
Well,
you know what
which
I mean?
example are you referring to?
Okay, born according to the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
Where is he? Where is this? This is so strange. No one would ever say that. When you have examples in the first century, in Hebrew, all over Israel, of people using that exact same language for human births only, nothing else.
I think that's not what Carrier's arguing.
Wait.
This is more...
Who did I time out? I didn't time. I haven't even touched this, bro. What are you talking about? So we already got conspiracy theories thrown around in the chat. No one timed anybody out, unless one of my whatever you call it, one of my people, whoever I don't know. I didn't time anybody out. I don't give a shit what you say here. Say whatever you want. But this is all I'm saying. Carrier's book is taking it's not using it's not using the data for what the data says. It's twisting things. It's making an argument saying this really means this, that really means this. Oh, this right here, it's really this. And then when you put it all together, then it all makes sense now. If one of those things falls off, the whole thing falls off. Because think about it. If Paul's talking about a human birth, then what do we have? What else is left? It's over. It's case closed for mythicism. Now you're just left with the conspiracy theory that the people before Paul made it up. All it takes is one thing to fall, and the whole thing falls.
Well, let's just to note, I guess, how strong this evidence is one way or the other. So one of the things that Carrier does do in his book, in fact, this might be a little bit beside all the other stuff that was discussed, but just very quickly to note, when Carrier does actually try to assess the evidence, and he's using his numerical methods to say how strong the evidence is one way or the other, in the case where he's actually trying to argue against mythicism as much as he thinks is allowed, he actually takes the letters of Paul and says it slightly favors historicity.
Yeah.
So when he takes that, though, and he still applies it to everything else, he's still saying it adds up to about a 1 in 3 chance that Jesus was historically real. So he actually says, best case scenario...
I just got to stop. I just think it's funny how the church is here today, ready to go. Like they're ready. Like it's funny because there's people who were like trying to like talk to people who I associate with about me. Not just people on the chat right now, but like people like harmonic atheists who's like jumping around, and people are sending me screenshots of harmonic atheists telling people Neil's he's having a mental breakdown. You should block him. Like there's people who are going out of their way trying to like get people to not talk to me anymore because they're angry about a video I made. When you make videos about other people all day long about ideas that you disagree with, like if you're going to be in the marketplace of ideas that you disagree with, just be okay with other people not disagreeing with you and dishing the shit back to you. That's all I'm saying. Like if we're going to have arguments and debates, let's do it. Let's not get crazy about it. Like did I do anything to try to hinder your success ever? No. That's all I'm saying. Do you want to read the super chat? Or do you want to finish your thought?
I basically already said my thought, other than that Carrier already considering, in the best case scenario for historicity, Paul favors historicity. So it seems like he's already taken into account what he thinks is the most likely case he believes, how much he thinks that evidence can still favor opposing him, and still say, overall, he thinks the better case is for mythicism. So it is worth noting that when he talks about these lines of evidence, he does try just saying not just what he thinks, but also what he thinks is the most you could stretch it in one direction or the other, basically to give the error bars on his estimates.
I'm fine with that. I wish he would bring that up more, because it seems like more often than not, he wants to act like Paul is just talking about celestial events. Now, if you want to argue that, fine. Like if that's what you think. I'm not saying that's not the case. Like it's not impossible that could be the case. But at least do what I do when I say things that aren't backed up by the consensus. I do this all the time. this is what I think. It's not the consensus. This is what the consensus says, and this is why they think it, which is they have their reasons for it. But this is what I think. But you don't get that. Instead, you hear.
But he wrote an entire book to do just that, though.
Yeah, but with Carrier in particular, there's a big conspiracy against him that they won't let him. They don't want to read his book. They don't want you to deal with his material. They won't even read my book, he says. Well, while he'll say the same thing about other people. I already know what's in your book, so I'm not going to read it. I think he said it Charlesworth, I think. So it's like, double standard there. But he wants everyone to read his book and like have a ready to go interpretation of what he thinks, but doesn't want to do the same thing for other people.
So in the particular example you mentioned with Charlesworth, because I remember watching that debate, the thing was that Charlesworth's scholarship on this, and it was related to the Josephus Tacitus, the Testimonium Flavianum stuff. What Charlesworth wrote was back in the 80s, and Carrier was saying, I'm relying on the stuff that's been published in the last 20 years, the more recent stuff that's outgrown since Charlesworth wrote. So the fact that Carrier is going to the most recent scholarship.
Let's talk about that, because in your article, you talked about Litwa had it so wrong about, you talked about Norelli.
Yeah, so
now I looked at this myself, and I saw the exact opposite. So
did you get the Norelli? Did you get Norelli's book?
No. What I was looking at was what Litwa was saying, and compared to what he was saying. Well, take me through, because I can't go through the whole book. So you could very well have something I don't know. Take me through this.
All right. So first off, let's just back up for the audience, because we say Norelli, and everyone in the chat should be going, "What are you talking about? What's a Norelli? Can I buy that for $1?" All right. So what we are talking about is one of the important texts for looking for any evidence or any conceptualization of a cosmic Christ figure, and the text is called the Ascension of Isaiah. It has a really long, weird textual history. We don't have it in its like original Greek form for everything, so we have it in a lot of translations, a lot of really weird textual traditions. Some of the most complete forms are in Ethiopic, for example. And part of the text would seem to suggest that Jesus is some sort of pre-existent being who lives in the higher heavens and who descends through the heavens, to comes down to the firmament to be killed by Satan in the sky and then be resurrected up there. That's at least the claim that Carrier is trying to make, that this is like what's there in the original version of the story. But there's also been a lot of material that has been added to or changed to the Ascension of Isaiah. And so there's all the question of, well, what's the original form, and does that look anything like what Carrier's thesis of a cosmic Christ instead of a historical Christ is going on? So that's the basic background. Now, Carrier, in his book, tries basically saying the basic outline that we see in the text is this sort of cosmic creature that lives in the seventh heaven. The heavens are layered, so he's basically living among the stars. He then goes through all the heavenly levels that correspond to like all the planetary levels until he finally comes to the firmament, where he's in human form. And while in that human form, he's supposed to be then basically grabbed by the demons, those controlled by Satan, or I think it's Samael is the name of the head of the demons in the Ascension of Isaiah, and that he's supposed to be killed, so that way then he can be resurrected, rise up in glory, and basically have defeated death and bring on, the next messianic age. Now, if you were to read the Ascension of Isaiah, if you were to go on, like, say, early Christian writing.com or things like that, you would actually see there's also this other additional information that would also suggest that Jesus did have a sojourn on earth. And the passages that matter the most are in the first part of the Ascension of Isaiah, in the first 5 chapters, which is usually also called the martyrdom. And then in chapter 11, there is this very quick gospel story. Basically everything from the birth of Jesus to him getting himself, kicked around to finally, of course, showing up in the sky again and rising through the heavenly layers. So we see that Carrier argues, based on a number of different arguments, that these things about Jesus on earth were actually later additions. The earlier version of the Ascension didn't have that, and all it had was the much more cosmic goings and comings of Jesus, never on earth. That's the argument.
Okay.
Now, go ahead.
Now, what was Litwa saying that was going against this?
Okay, so the main things for this was Lit was pointing to, well, if you read in particular in chapter 11, that pocket gospel, it clearly says Jesus is born of Mary and doing stuff on earth. Yeah, it's absolutely clear in the pocket gospel, Jesus is a guy on earth. It will still be saying that he came from the higher heavens, but nonetheless, he did stuff in a historical setting. So Litwa points to that. And he also points to, I think it's in chapter 3 of the Ascension of Isaiah, something that also seems to recall the same sort of basic story. And so Lit was like, well, case closed is saying right there, and then Lit from there saying, so the mythicists have to argue that these are just ad hoc interpolations. There's no reason to think that. There's no scholarship to back that up. And in particular, Litwa then cites a book by Enrico Norelli, who was basically one of the lead people in the projects of going through all the extant manuscripts of the Ascension Isaiah, produce that in a volume, and then have a commentary on all those different textual traditions to make some best guesses of what was the history of these transmissions, what texts relate to each other, what might the original form have looked like. And Litwa then argues that Norelli says that the text is actually holistic. It doesn't have like a bazillion interpolations. The pocket gospel isn't interpolated, and so on. And also then note, because if you flip to Carrier's book, and as you can see, it has at least a few pages in it. If you were to jump into the bibliography of On the History of Jesus and you were looking for Norelli, it doesn't show up.
It has Norelli's book though, right?
Now, that's one of the details. So, but like I say, I'm just trying to like say, here's what Litwa was saying at first. And what you could easily do and say, hey, Litwa basically claims Carrier hasn't even read Norelli, hasn't dealt with the arguments of him. And so we should be then going against Carrier. He's not even engaging the arguments from the best scholars out there. And that would be a legitimate thing. It's like, hey, here's someone taking a fringe position. They don't even touch the best arguments out there
and then
against it.
Okay, so then Carrier says, but I actually have his book in there, which I think is true. Okay.
Yes.
And then, so, okay, why is this a big deal then?
Okay, so first off, when Litwa tries citing the first chapters of the Ascension of Isaiah against Carrier, he is acting like everyone agrees that this was not an add-on. This wasn't a later edition. But Norelli himself says this is a later addition to the Ascension of Isaiah. The first 5 chapters were not composed by the same person who did chapters 6 through 11. And he says that in black and white, in Italian, but in black and white. So on my blog, I actually reproduced one of the texts, the lines of text in Italian, and I give a machine translation of that because, well, I'm no Italian expert, so I'm just relying on what I can check with Google Translator, just with dictionaries.
Can you share that or no? Do you not have that on you to share? I just want to share.
Oh, I can share it, yeah.
Okay.
Do you want me to share the actual text or my quote from it?
If you could share whatever you got on the blog, or don't you have the blog or no?
Yeah, I got the blog open, so let me go ahead and share my screen. Present screen. That's a screen. All right. So here, this is from page 46 of volume 8 of Corpus Christianum. This is the series that does this.
Okay, but I'm pretty sure Litwa was saying that this was done in 3 parts. He might not have said it in that video.
No, he said, he cited chapter 3 to argue why chapter 11 Pocket Gospel was original, and also proof that the text is about that. He's saying that there wasn't any interpolations, and that's just arbitrary to say so. And here's the thing, though: if the original text is just 6 through 11, and nothing that happened in chapter 1 and 5 was part of what the original author said, you can't use what was later additions to say what the first author said. That would be like using John to interpret Mark.
I don't think he says that, though.
No, it's exactly what he says.
Are you sure? I don't think.
That's. I wouldn't be making this big of a deal about it unless that's what he said and why he cited chapter 3.
But here's the thing: at the end of the day, because no one knows, we're all guessing on which.
This isn't a matter of guessing. This is the fact that
I think
Litwa said something
I think it's pretty
that
clear.
wasn't.
I think it's pretty clear. The Pocket Gospel is added on later. I think it's pretty clear.
Well, no, that's exactly what Litwa argues against. He says that was part of the original as well as chapters 1 through 5.
But I think he's talking about the Christian edition all at one time. there's a Christian edition, there's a Jewish edition in the beginning. This was a Jewish text at first, and then it became a Christian text. I think that's what he's saying.
No, not at all.
Well, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. I'll hear what I got to hear.
It's also
what
the
he
same
says.
in his book, where he cites 3 pages of the Norelli volume against Carrier, against
Now,
the
let me
Pocket
ask you
Gospel.
this. Let me ask you this. If you've heard Litwa say, that's exactly what he said. What he meant by that was by saying that he thinks that there was a 2nd century, 1st century BCE version of this thing before Christianity, and then a later Christian version.
That's not what Litwa says, and that's not what Carrier says. No one's been saying that.
But that's what some people are saying.
Well, we're not talking about some people. We're talking about Litwa and Carrier.
No, but this is what Litwa was actually referring to this book right here. That's what it says in here. That's what it says in here.
It doesn't say it's 2nd century BC.
Yes, it does. I'll show you. Look. Martyrdom and Ascension of Isaiah. Look. 2nd century BC.
Wait, I can't read that
AD.
very well. Could you point? Because I'm having a hard time reading it with the camera.
On the top of the screen. 2nd century BC to 4th century AD.
Well, that's actually got to be a typo because everyone thinks it's
not
between the.
It's not. People think there's an earlier version of this that's not Christian at all, just completely Jewish.
Well, I'll put this much. That's not what Norelli says.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You're taking Norelli as like he's like the only guy who wrote on this.
Well, that's who Litwa cited. That's the
no,
only source.
Litwa cites this in the video. He cites this exact same book.
He cites it to read the text, but if you go to, no, in particular, when I wanted to do my citations, what I also went to was Litwa's book, How the Gospels Create History, and the only text on the Ascension of Isaiah that he cites relevant to this is the Norelli volume.
Right. See, but if Litwa knew that his words were going to be so critiqued like this, I think he would have been a little more careful. I think he was just speaking freely because he was talking about this text right here, what the scholarship says in this text.
Well,
which
then
is
that's
not
an
the
even
same
bigger,
as Norelli.
But here's the thing. He directly cited Norelli to defend himself. He cited and said, everyone should learn Italian so they could read this text because it's so important.
Yeah, no, I like I said, I haven't read the entire text of Norelli. I don't know all of what it says.
And also, it's worth noting that if you actually
showed me, from what you just showed me, I think Norelli is even saying that there's 2 or 3 stages done here.
Yeah. And the oldest stage is related to, or the oldest part is what's called the actual ascension. So one of the other reasons we actually can say reasonably confidently that there is multiple stages to this document is that there are manuscripts of the Ascension of Isaiah that's completely missing the first 5 chapters. It starts right at chapter 6.
Right, yeah.
And
I'm not going to sit here and say I know all that information.
Yeah, and also if you read the text, like if you read chapter 1, it has an introduction, then you go to chapter 6, it like has an introduction again. A book that introduces itself twice looks like something spliced together.
Yeah, it looks. You could see, you can definitely tell. But just like I honestly think the Christian edition was way later. It's not mentioned by anybody for like the 3rd century. Someone talks about it as a Christian text. I'm not even.
I can't remember.
Like, and I'm pretty like, don't quote me on that. Like, I might be wrong, obviously, but I'm pretty confident that this text is not mentioned by any Christians for a long time. Like, it's not used by the early Christian church fathers for sure. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong though. I'm open. If I'm wrong about that, then sure, let's talk about it.
Yeah, I don't know, and it's largely immaterial for this discussion, anyways. The key thing is this. And like I say, also one of the reasons it's usually said to be 2nd century or maybe 1st century AD is that in the in chapter, I can't remember 6 or 7, but there's basically still the myth of the return of Nero. It's still like hiding there in the text, which already kind of indicates this must be post Second Temple sort of story going on.
Yeah. Now
I have to admit that is the first time I've seen anything say that part of the text might go to the 2nd century BC. Well, that's the first time I've seen that.
That explains why you think Lit was such a lie. Like
no. Because here's the thing. That's actually irrelevant. Because what Lit was
he does mention this book, though. He does mention this.
But here's the thing. He might have mentioned the book, but guess what he said? He said there weren't these interpolations to the text. He denies it.
Right, but I think I'm not Litwa, but it makes sense from how I know Litwa that he's talking about the Christian version of this thing. Once the Christian version of this thing was penned in, that's the Christian version of this. There might be one more.
Well, here's the thing, though. In that talk in particular, what we're talking about is the video that Litwa did on History Valley with Jacob Berman. Subscribe to that channel if you haven't already. Come on, we've got to share the love in this YouTube system. In that video, he says that basically, now some scholars will not like what this says and then deny and say it's an interpolation. So Litwa tries arguing that it's only basically bad scholars, and he basically talked about mythicists, saying that this is an interpolation.
Yeah.
And the thing is,
so,
if
I don't know,
if Litwa had actually read the 3 pages of Norelli that he actually cited in his book, he would have seen that that's not true, because in the Norelli volume, he is basically trying to argue that the Pocket Gospel is original to the text, not in a later edition, and the person he's arguing with to make this case is R.H. Charles, who is writing about the Ascension of Isaiah and the manuscripts traditions as he knew it in the year 1900. And R.H. Charles is not a mythicist.
I'm going to have Litwa back on to go over all this and to clear it all up. Because...
Well, I mind you, though, in my blog
I think that's we can go back and forth on what Litwa meant or what he got wrong.
It doesn't matter what he meant, it's what he said.
Well, that's the thing. And so if we're going to take people by what they say and like misleading people, Carrier's the one who should be under the hot seat here, because he's the guy who goes around.
Wait. We don't get to say somebody did a bad thing, therefore we can ignore someone else doing a bad thing. No, that doesn't fly.
No, I'm saying the opposite of that.
Well, then let's hold Litwa's feet to the fire, because here's the thing. He also makes these sorts of claims in his peer-reviewed book about how the Gospels became history. He cites Norelli, he cites the same 3 pages, and he cites them against Carrier. And then he brings up the same thing when he's on the YouTube video with Jacob Berman. And it's a presentation that he had already prepared in advance. These weren't off-the-cuff remarks.
Well, have you read the entire Norelli book?
I have read the sections that Litwa cited, and I look to see if the volume of Norelli agrees with his greater claims about the history of the text, and if it's coherent in the way that Litwa claims. And Norelli does not agree, and it goes against it.
If you're right, then yes, this is a big deal. And
that's why I directly cited.
I'll be more than happy. I'll be more than happy on my own channel to break through this and say, look, how are you not seeing that you're wrong here? You can mark my words on that.
Yeah.
I've done it before.
I will note in my blog post, to make that so everyone can see what we're talking about, not only do I, literally write out what Norelli said, but I also have links to the timestamps of the video with Litwa, so you can go and hear exactly what Litwa said, and then you can compare to what I'm claiming.
Okay. Well, I'm telling you right now, we're going to get to the bottom of that.
Okay.
I'm pretty confident that Litwa knows what he's doing, but you could be right.
Well, here's the thing. The other thing, though, that shows Litwa did not do his homework, because he claimed over and over again that Carrier doesn't even know the Norelli volume, let alone cited it. And that is factually false, too.
Now, didn't you mention in your article that Carrier was wrong on some stuff about Norelli, though?
What I said there was 2 things. One, that Norelli should have actually been mentioned as bibliography, because I think that accounts for why Litwa made the mistake. So Carrier's going to argue that Litwa was lying about these things, but I'm going to argue that it's basically Litwa did not really bring his A game to check things. Okay. Which is criticizing him as a scholar, not criticizing him as a person in that case. But here's the key thing. When Litwa cites Norelli against Carrier, this is related only to the Pocket Gospel. And if you go to Litwa's book, all there is just saying, and Norelli says says that it's original. He doesn't tell us what the arguments are from Norelli. He doesn't say what Carrier's arguments are. We don't know why we should accept one over the other. And we also don't know if Norelli's arguments actually counter anything Carrier says. There's just no critiquing one way or the other. It's just Litwa saying, Norelli said this, therefore Carrier's wrong. And if you then go to the Norelli volume to look at what sorts of arguments he makes, and compare that to the arguments Carrier makes, you'll see that nothing that Norelli argues actually counters what Carrier's arguments are. So to use Norelli against Carrier when they're not even talking, like making the same sorts of judgments, is just to prefer one over the other rather than to argue one
Right.
over the other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's as much as I really want to spend on this Ascension of Isaiah anyway, because there's just so many questions about it anyway. We don't really know. We don't really know much about it. So the other thing I want to get into, I'm going to save the super chats for the end. I just want to keep going. I want to keep this going. The other thing that you and I disagreed on what was the next big one we disagreed on? Oh, and let me ask you this: what was this academic peer review paper that he got this Jesus Ben Damius thing through peer reviewed on? What was the name of this? Do you know the name of the paper?
Let me see if it happens to be in his bibliography, because I can't remember the journal off the top of my head.
It just doesn't sound right. But I'm not an expert. I could be wrong.
Well, I mean, this is something you could check. We can Google that as well. But
because the reason why I brought that up as an example, just off the top of my head, this is one of the things that like people like cringe at. Like when I talk to scholars about some of the stuff mythicists push, is the Jesus Ben Damius thing. Is just most people cringe at that. Like it's like that's the worst. Like the text says what it says. There's no reason to like change what the text says. And then you have to ask, is Jesus Ben Damius?
Here we go.
Go ahead.
So this is from the Journal of History. I'm sorry, the Journal of Early Christian Studies, Volume 20, Number 4. This is from winter 2012. The title of the article is Origen, Eusebius, and the Accidental Interpolation in Josephus, Antiquities Jews 20.200.
Okay.
And so this was published almost exactly 10 years ago. So it's gone through. It's in the peer review world, and whether you agree with it or not is a different question. That did Carrier actually make it go through the peer review process? And he absolutely did.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a lot of stuff gets through peer review. I mean, you got Gary Habermas writing about how he can prove the resurrection happened, passing peer review with that stuff. But why is it that so many of Carrier's points are just so heavily like? Do you actually think that some of this stuff is just because they don't like mythicism, or do you actually we take a look at some of this stuff? It does kind of sound crazy. Like to say that the text actually means something else than what it actually says. We're adding steps to doing history. It's not the data anymore. It's about interpretation.
Well, isn't that kind of the history of religion? Everyone interpreting and reinterpreting text. That's kind of the game.
Theology. That's theology. Yeah.
That's actually the argument then, because we're trying to make an historical argument of what was the earlier theology.
Yeah. Now, I just don't understand how you can get. The reason why I'm hung up on this one is because James, who's called the brother of who was called the Christ, James, brother of Jesus, who was called the Christ, right? Mm-hmm. Now, this text is referring to something because we don't know who's called the Christ unless we go back to Book 18, whereas this interpolated is hell passage, right? Mm-hmm. Well, it's a chapter about Pontius Pilate and all the woes and calamities that happened in Jerusalem, and then according to people like Steve Mason, people who are study this text, say there probably was some sort of text there, this so-called Christ, someone, whatever, some guy. And so we have another text that's referring back to this. And for James, who gets killed, there's no the high priesthood, right? When it goes to Jesus Ben Damius in the next passage, where are we getting signified that James is of this family of Sadducees? Because it's only the Sadducees that attain the high priesthoods. It's Sadducees and Levites, basically. Mm-hmm. So we're assuming that James is part of this priestly family.
Well, when you say James, don't confuse that with James, the brother of Jesus. We're talking about who is this James being referred to in Josephus? Is this the brother of Jesus from Christian tradition, or could this just be James, the brother of Jesus Ben Damius? And so the whole reason this James is even mentioned is because all this political machination going on leads to Jesus Ben Damius becoming the next priest or high priest.
Right, but when you leave the text the way it is, it makes sense, it's coherent. When you take it apart and say, oh, it really means Jesus ben Damnius is the one who was the brother of Jesus. Now we have all these different. Now it's like incoherent. Now we don't even know what everything. We don't know who James is. We don't know. None of it makes
Well,
sense.
actually,
anymore.
we do, because again, if we just remove the part, or like I say, the argument is him called the Christ, that little bit in the original Greek, that was a marginal note or an accidental insertion. If that was not their original, then in Josephus it talks about James, the brother of Jesus, and then who is this Jesus? It's this Jesus ben Damnius.
It sounds great if you want that to this is how a lot of mythicism points go this way, where if you want it to sound that way, you can make it sound that way, like he pulls off in his peer review academic paper. But is it necessary? And is that what, like, can we use Occam's razor and just say the text says what it says? Do we have to go with there's really a mistake here or an interpolation, and they're really like, we're adding layers to something that's so simple.
Well, that's the thing, though. That, it is worth noting that there were reasons to actually look at this and wonder what's going on. First off, in terms of vocabulary, outside of all this Jesus stuff, where else is the word Christ used in the entirety of Josephus? It's not there.
Wait, say that again? Thinking about...
So other than the interpolated passage, at least whatever degree interpolated about Jesus in book 18, and then this little bit in book 20, the word Christos doesn't show up in Josephus. It's a term that doesn't show up there, and he never explains to his audience. So if it suddenly just popped up here in book 20,
I think
Josephus would need to explain himself.
I think he does use it to talk about certain high priests and kings that were anointed, but he doesn't use it as like a title. You're right. The only time it's used as a title for someone who's called the Messiah, that's the only time.
Yeah, so
but
that
he does
one
use
thing
that
is
word.
already a bit weird. The second weird thing is there's also another weird thing is the phrase.
But wait a minute though. This text is in the 90s. The Gospels are already out by then, or not all of them, but there's Gospels already out. This Christianity, we have Christian documents from the Pompeii volcano from Mount Vesuvius. There was Christians in Rome, in Italy, in the 70s, in the late 70s.
Probably.
So why is it so crazy? Why does it have to be that Josephus can't know about Jesus?
Oh, no one makes that argument. I certainly don't, and Carragher doesn't.
That's my whole point. Is like, you could just Occam's razor the whole idea that all this stuff is really some sort of it all means something else than it really does. Josephus probably heard about it from everyone else.
Well, here's the thing,
the guy who's called the Christ.
Well, there is an argument, though, that I think we need to be a bit careful about. You're arguing for the plausibility that Josephus would have said this, and I grant that totally. There's no reason why Josephus couldn't have known about that. Yeah. But it's plausible that Josephus could have written about Jesus, therefore he did. That is not something that you can argue based on that kind of evidence. Now, like I say, if we want to talk about other things that are a bit peculiar. So first off, using this title where Josephus never explains it anywhere else. That already is kind of weird. Second, the little Greek phrase that we're talking about is just 3 words in Greek.
Yeah, but if there is a skeleton version of the Testimonium Flavianum, which most experts in Josephus, I'm not talking about most scholars, most Bible scholars, I'm talking about experts of Josephus, who are like Steve Mason, for prime example, and a couple others, they think there probably was something there. Not even close to what it says today. Probably something like mocking, probably mocking the guy. So this guy is so-called Christ, who is working wonders.
Well, actually, we got to stop on that so-called Christ business, because that particular phrase is exactly what you see in the Gospel of Matthew used by the narrator to talk about Jesus, him called the Christ. Now, Matthew is not calling Jesus so-called, but yet that exact phrase you're finding in Josephus. So when you see a gospel phrase in Josephus, you should at least pause and wonder why.
But what I'm saying is, he's already giving you an introduction to this character. And now in book 20, he's referring back to that. They connect. The two connect. That's what it seems like.
But again, that assumes that everything we see or that there is something there in book 18, And yes, Steve Mason thinks there was something there originally. And of course, I would also point, well, what about, like, say, Ken Olson, who's also done a deep dive study into the language of that passage and says it looks way more like the language of Eusebius rather than Josephus.
Well, yeah, because it's so heavily interpolated that it's not the same thing anymore. So yeah, I get what he's saying.
Well, like, in particular, in the articles that Ken Olson has written, he also says, like, here's a phrase that people thought was neutral, something that Josephus could have written, or this was Josephine style, and then shows, actually, this phrase is not only Christian, but uniquely Eusebian. So, like, for example, like the tribe of Christians, that was like a uniquely Eusebian message. But you would first think, well, that doesn't sound like a pro-Christian statement, but it's such Eusebian language that it's weird.
There's no part of me is denying that Eusebius was all over that shit.
Yeah.
All over that shit. And we know for a fact that he lied about other stuff too. Eusebius is the church historian. He's the one with the books. He's the one he's the one doing the history. He's the one he's in control of all that stuff. He's solely in charge of all that.
Right.
And at a turning point in Roman history, he's gonna do that. That makes perfect sense to me.
Right.
All I'm saying, which I'm as someone who's not an expert, I'm going with what the experts tell me, and it does make sense. It's not crazy. They're not getting paid by a church. They don't have an agenda. These are legitimate claim. Like, there's a legitimate reasons to think there was something there. You know, which is why the Jesus Bandamius thing sounds so cringe to a lot of people, because
yeah. Well, there's one other thing
for
to note, though, that actually also, like I say, one of the things that also Carrier brought up in his article, which is a bit weird, is people will point to there being something about Jesus in Josephus by citing Origen, because Origen seems to suggest that Josephus says something about Jesus, which would then say, hey, there's something here before Eusebius mucks things up. And that would be a reasonable argument. But the thing is, when Josephus is talking about this, and he's talking about James, the brother of Jesus, and the description he gives of this doesn't match actually what we see in Josephus. He talks about this person basically being killed in a very different way, and that this like brought on like the onslaught of the Romans right after. There's things that we don't find in Josephus, but we find in a different source well after Josephus. It looks like from Hegesippus. So Carrier's argument that there's a mistake on Origen's part.
But that makes no sense, because Origen is actually talking about James too. What does Josephus talk about when he talks about Jesus? James.
That's the assumption. Well, that's the assumption. The thing is, though, when Origen is discussing this James character,
why doesn't he say that though? Why doesn't he say he's talking about Hegesippus?
Because he probably made a mistake.
This is the point that I've been making, that I'm going to keep making tonight.
Well, actually, here's the thing, though.
Listen, you're a data scientist. This is why it's surprising to me that you're the one arguing for these cases, because the data is not saying this. We're interpreting things differently. We're changing things around.
But there's two things to note.
Bandamius is really different. Oh, it's really Hegesippus. It's not Josephus.
Well, there's two things to note. There's two things to note, though. One, the description that Origen provides for this James passage doesn't match what we see in Josephus, but it does match what we see in Hegesippus.
But it kind of does. It kind of does, though.
But it doesn't. Because, like, for example, it talks about James being pushed off the temple and things like that. That's not what you find in Josephus.
But you expected to copy it word for word? I don't know what you're trying to say.
I'm saying he's saying things that aren't in Josephus at all.
Like what?
That, like, for example, the way James was killed was by being, like, thrown off the temple. You don't find that in Josephus, but you do find it in Hegesippus.
But what does Origen say?
Well, that's what Origen is saying. That he's saying that's what Josephus said.
Yeah, but he's talking about like he says it's about Josephus. Like we're not going to take his own word for it.
Well, if you made a mistake. And here's the thing. One of the other things that Carrier notes.
That mistake is so perfect.
Well, here's the thing, though. Again,
we have another thing. It's another.
Well, hold on.
Another
Let's look at the evidence.
Bandamius thing.
Look at the evidence, though. If Origen is saying Josephus says this and Josephus doesn't, then there must have been a mistake.
It still fits, though. It still fits for Josephus.
If he says something Josephus said and Josephus didn't say it, that's wrong. That's just fact.
But he's talking hundreds of years after the fact of Josephus.
But if he's saying this is what Josephus said, and Josephus didn't say it, Origen is wrong.
Yeah,
and this isn't actually that.
No, but he's sort. Oh, let's pull it up then. Instead of arguing about it, let's pull up what it says. Let's pull.
All right. Well, if you want to go ahead and pull it up, because.
All right.
Yeah, if you could do that.
What does Origen say on Josephus?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it matches pretty good. There's no reason to think that he's talking about somebody else.
Well, here's the thing, though, and other thing there's worth noting is that actually Carrier notes another place where actually Origen does confuse Hegesippus and Josephus.
Really? Where's this?
I'd have to bring up the article to find that other example, but it's mentioned in his peer-reviewed paper as well.
So, okay. I want to see that,
and
too.
It's also worth noting, sometimes in the Gospels, like Mark will say, and said by such and such prophet, but he quotes the wrong prophet. These mistakes happen.
Yeah, but why would they don't happen you don't just get somebody wrong, though. You don't just
it happens all the time. That's normal. People make these mistakes.
Really?
Oh,
People say I'm writing about Josephus, but whoops, brain fart. I really was talking about somebody else.
Yeah,
that all the time.
Well, again, let's remember, like I said, in the Gospels, like in Mark, he'll say I'm quoting Isaiah, but he's actually doing Zechariah.
I don't know where I'm going to find a good source on the internet. If anyone has a good source on the internet to find this, I'm looking through crappy sources right now.
Yeah, if need be, I'll try to find Carrier's original paper later.
All right. But think about this, though. Josephus talks about, when he's talking about Jesus in the in book 20, it's talking about James.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when Origen's talking about Josephus and Jesus, is also talking about James. We had the same source. We had the same topics. We had it's the same source material, whether he says it the same way or not.
But there's no reason. So if he says I got this from Josephus and Josephus didn't say it, then Origen has to be wrong. There's no other way around it.
He's not quoting from Josephus.
If he says Josephus said this and he doesn't say that, it doesn't matter if it's a quote. If I say you kick puppies and you've never done that, it doesn't matter if I say, well, I'm not exactly quoting you. I've said something that's why right.
That's why I really want to pull this up, because if I'm not mistaken, that this is it. Okay, Origen. Let's see. On Matthew. On Josephus. Here we go. I'm not sure what this source is, but so here's okay. I think this is what he's talking about. Okay, I think this is it.
If you could share your screen.
Let me share my screen. I don't know what source this is, so make sure if you can help me out with this. I just pulled this up. This is textexcavation.com.
Okay.
I don't know. Let's read it, though. Let's read it. Okay, so it says, but James is the one whom Paul says he saw in the epistle of the Galatians, saying, I do not see any of the apostles except James, brother of the Lord. And in such a way among the people did this James shine for his justice that Flavius Josephus, who wrote Judaic, he's even talking about what book? In 20 books, wishing to demonstrate the cause why the people suffered such great things, that even the temple was raised down, said that these things come to pass them in accordance with the ire of God on account of the things which were dared by them against James, brother Jesus, who was called Christ. That's exactly what Josephus says right there.
Well, where does it say in Josephus that the temple was destroyed because of what happened to James?
Wishing to demonstrate that the cause, Josephus wrote, wishing to demonstrate to the cause of why the people suffered such great calamity, such great things, that even the temple was raised down. See, I don't know if that's what he's trying to say.
Well, that's what Origen, though, is claiming Josephus says.
But that's the thing. Josephus is leading up to the fall of the temple in his book.
He is, but that is still far away from the time that this is going on. And what he describes is not about the destruction of the temple. It's about the order of priesthoods. And nowhere does Josephus say the temple was destroyed or the Romans attacked because of what happened to James. That doesn't appear in Josephus at all.
But we have an exact match. James, the brother of Jesus, who is called Christ, in the text.
But what about the other stuff that doesn't match at all? We have to account for both of these things.
But he's telling you where he's getting it from.
But that's not in Josephus. If he's telling us it's in Josephus, but it's not, there has to be a mistake, and we need to find a better solution.
Well, that's the thing. Josephus' whole entire book is about everything leading up to the fall of the temple.
But where does it say in Josephus? Where does Josephus say the temple was destroyed because of what happened to James?
In the end, in the Jewish war, he talks not because of just James, because of the things that
no. It's not just. Here's the thing, though. Josephus never brings up what happened to James as the reason for the war or the destruction of the temple. That never is said by Josephus.
Yeah, but it's in the story. It's part of the story.
But again, what does Josephus say was the cause of the temple being destroyed? Does he say James was the reason? No, he does not. All that it says is James was killed illegally, and because of that, the old high priest was kicked out and the new high priest came in.
Right, okay.
So nothing about why the temple was raised.
No, I'm just not following you, dude. Like you don't then say because he has extra information in the
No,
text,
here's the thing,
you don't then say he's wrong and he's actually means this text, which is way later.
Well, here's the thing. The reason I'm saying that is these sorts of things about James being killed and then the destruction of the temple happening, that is in Hegesippus.
Right.
And the fact that this James is being called the just, you don't find that as well anywhere in Josephus, but you do find it in Hegesippus.
Yeah, but Hegesippus is using the same information that's already out in his time period.
In the late 2nd century, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's not Josephus.
Right, but Origen has access to both.
But here's the thing. Origen is telling us this is what he got from Josephus, and it's wrong. It's demonstrably wrong.
But you're missing the point, though.
No, you're missing the point here, because here's what he's saying, and it's wrong.
No.
Tell me where. Tell me where this is in Josephus.
He's telling you that James, the brother of Jesus, who's called Christ, is written about in Flavius Josephus. It doesn't matter
and
what else
everything else there too. Everything else there
That's
as well.
all extra information.
That he says he got from Josephus. That's where he says he got from Josephus.
That's just how he's writing it.
And then he wrote something wrong.
So
this is demonstrably wrong.
But he's not saying all this is from Flavius Josephus.
No, he literally says these things were done because of what happened to James. He is saying this is what Josephus is telling us. Wishing to demonstrate the cause of why the people suffered and the reason the temple was destroyed was because of what happened to James, because they dared to against James, the brother of Jesus, who is called Christ. This is what this is what Origen is saying. Josephus is saying. Josephus doesn't say that, so Origen is wrong.
And because Origen, who's a Christian, is focused on this part of the book, and Josephus, who is a Jew, who's focused on the calamities leading up to the fall and the destruction of the temple, one of those reasons being James.
But here's the thing. Josephus never says that. Ever.
Josephus talks about this throughout the entire book. And
where
the temple falls.
This is a factual claim that Origen is saying. Josephus says that what happened to James was the reason for the destruction of the temple.
No. Josephus constantly is giving you reasons of what's happening in
There's
Jerusalem.
the actual Josephus, but here's what Origen is saying. This is the key thing. Origen is saying Josephus said X. Josephus did not say X.
So we just cross off Josephus because he has extra information.
Here's the thing.
That's ridiculous.
No. This is actually more ridiculous. That Origen says something wrong, and therefore we're going to accept what he says.
It's not wrong. It's just he's adding extra Christian shit to the text.
Then he's lying. If he's saying this is what
lying.
Josephus said, here's the thing. No, this would be a lie if Josephus is saying this is what Josephus says. Josephus doesn't say it, and Origen really believes this is what Josephus said. If Josephus says X, Origen claims Josephus said Y instead of X.
That's not what it is, though. No.
Here's the thing.
Where? No. Let me correct that.
There's nothing to correct here because I've been absolutely clear.
Let me finish this. Josephus says X, and but I'm saying X and Y. therefore we throw out X. He's saying X and X are still there. He's adding shit to the text. Doesn't mean what he's saying is not from Josephus.
Because here's what he said. He says explicitly, Josephus says, wishing to demonstrate the cause by which the people suffered. And the reason they suffered is because of what they dared to do to James.
That's the whole point of what I was just telling you. The entire book is about why the temple fell.
And here's the thing. Josephus said absolutely nothing about James having anything to do with why the temple fell.
Then why would he tell it in the story then?
Because he is telling us
about... Why
isn't
it even in the story?
Well, let's take a look at the original text of Josephus. He's saying, here is this James. He was killed by an illegal assembly. This caused the next priest to then take place of the previous one, and that's why Jesus ben Damnius is the high priest. He is going through and explaining how the next priest got his position. That's why it's brought up.
Right. And so Origen is reading this text, and he thinks he's interpreting it as in saying, part of the reason why the temple fell, according to Josephus, is because of how horrible these people were and how they couldn't keep it together. And, they killed a just man named James, who was the brother of our Christ.
Well, here's the thing, though. Nowhere
he's referring to that text.
But here's the thing. If you go to Josephus, go to Antiquities, it says nothing about James being just or righteous or innocent. None of those things are said.
But Origen is writing 200 years later. He's adding his own shit to the story.
But he's claiming this is what Josephus says. It doesn't matter when he writes it. I'm writing about Josephus now. I better say what Josephus says. To me, it makes perfect sense. Not in the least. You are claiming, you are basically not even reading what Origen is saying.
The only way you could convince me that Origen's talking about someone else is if I wanted it to not be about Josephus.
Well, here's the thing.
But he mentions... What's more likely, that we go what the text tells us, or we interpret it the way we want?
Well, here's what's more likely: that Origen made a mistake, or somehow there's missing text from Josephus that happens to be this giant Christian statement about how James was actually killed by the Jews, and this brought down the destruction of the temple, which Josephus doesn't currently say, but said in some other mystery version that we've lost. No. Here's the thing, that Origen made a mistake about what he's citing is actually plausible, because he makes this same mistake confusing Josephus and Hegesippus in other places.
But
the Gospels make this sort of mistake too.
The mistake happens to have two characters that happen to be in the text that he's claiming to call from. And look, let's say he says, I got this from Tacitus. Tacitus doesn't mention James. Then you'd be right, because Tacitus never mentions James. But Josephus actually mentions Jesus, brother of the Christ. So now we have a text, and it lines up. There's no reason not to believe it.
But here's the thing.
That's all I'm saying.
Again, but here's the thing. First off, Origen is telling us things that Josephus doesn't say. And secondly, the whole thing
is adding shit. I already acknowledged that. He adds shit to the story.
It's not adding. He is claiming. This is what Josephus says.
You still have James, the brother of Jesus, who is called Christ.
You are now also ignoring everything before that. It says Origen is telling us that this is what he claims Josephus says. He is saying that Origen is saying, Josephus is saying, the reason the temple was destroyed was because of what happened to James. That is not in Josephus. Therefore, Origen is wrong. He is citing someone else. And the thing is, Hegesippus does say these sorts of things. He does talk about James being the just, being the brother of Jesus, dying a terrible death. And because of that terrible death, then suddenly the Romans attacked the temple. That's all in Hegesippus. It's not in Josephus. That's why it looks more plausible. What Origen is talking about is a different text, because what he says matches a different text than what he cites. In the same sort of way, in the Gospels, sometimes Mark will cite a prophet, but he gives the name wrong. These mistakes happen.
Right, but the mistake that you claim, if it's not a mistake, it still works. It's not like I said, if he was, let's say he's quoting from Celsus, or he's quoting from Diodorus Sicily, and it just doesn't make sense because Diodorus never said that, then you'd be right. But he's actually making a claim about a book, and it fits without whether it's a mistake or not. Like, can you at least admit that it's possible that there's no mistake here?
It is a mistake. It's obviously, clearly a mistake. You can't deny what it says.
So
It says, here's the...
So everybody's wrong about this, except for you and a couple other people.
Well, let's look at the facts. Does Origen say, Josephus says the temple was destroyed because of what happened to James?
It doesn't matter. He's
Yes or no?
shit
Yes or
on.
no? Yes or no?
Yes, he kind of does. Because
This is a yes.
It's in the story. Yes.
Does
It's
Josephus
one
actually
of the-
say...
it's
Does
one of the
Josephus
reasons.
actually say the temple was destroyed because of what happened to James?
No, but he does say that all of these events are what led up to the fall of the temple. And James is part of this story. So yes.
No, again, what does it actually say in Josephus? Does it actually say James was a just man, killed unjustly, and that was the cause of the war? No.
No, but he doesn't say it's part of the story though.
But it's not what Josephus says. But here's the thing.
That's how Origen's interpreting it. That's
what do you mean interpreting? He is telling us this is what Josephus said. This is said Josephus, who wrote
20.
this.
Look. 20 books. In 20 books, wishing to demonstrate the cause of why 20 fucking books, not one book, not one passage, in 20 books. Says it right there. Wishing to demonstrate the cause of why the people suffered such great things. That's what he's saying. And that's what Josephus says too. Josephus tells you.
And then the next part,
things.
and then the next part, right after there's that big E there, and then it said, these things came to pass against them in accordance with the ire of God on account of the things that were dared by them against James. Or in other words, he is saying...
Because he's a Christian. He thinks it's all about this.
But here's the thing. Here's the thing. It is claiming in this statement that the person who is saying this is Josephus. It says right there, it's Josephus said that these things came to pass.
Yeah. Josephus
and those things did not come to pass because of what happened to James. Josephus never said that.
That's not what Origen's saying here.
It is exactly what it's saying.
Origen says it right here. In 20 books, he demonstrates why the temple fell. Right? Does he not? Does Josephus do that? Yes or no?
Yes.
There you go. That's what he says.
The next sentence, next part. But these things came to pass against them in accordance with the ire of God on account of the things they dared against James.
Because
that's the reason given.
Because Origen's a Christian and he's talking about this from a Christian perspective, he's going to emphasize...
Stop. Notice the word said. Who is doing the saying?
Josephus.
So, Origen is saying Josephus said this. Origen is wrong. Josephus did not say this.
Yeah, but he talks about what happened to James.
Does
that's all
it say?
He's saying.
No, that's more than what it says. It said these things came to pass in accordance with the ire of God because of what they did to James. Does Josephus say that? No.
Yeah, but
that is a demonstrable fact. This is totally binary.
I just showed you.
You are ignoring everything I just said. So let's take a breather for a moment. Let's stop. Hold on.
He's talking about all 20 books. He's talking about the whole entire collection of the books of why the temple fell.
And at the end,
he's emphasizing James because he's a Christian. He's Origen.
But here's the key thing. Again, where it begins with the word said. Do you
think Origen really cares about all these other examples that Josephus gives? He's focusing on the one that's relevant to him.
But here's the thing. What Origen is focusing on does not exist in Josephus. That's the fact.
Yes, it does.
Where does it say in Josephus? This is a fact. This is a binary statement.
You get a passage about a guy named James who's a brother of who was called Christ. Brother of Jesus who was called Christ. That's all you get.
Where does it say, though, in anywhere, that was the reason the temple was destroyed?
But he says it's in 20 books. He says that.
But here's the thing.
He's not just saying it's one thing alone.
Well, no, that's exactly what's being said right here, starting with that capital letter E. So that Josephus said that these things came to pass against them in accordance with the ire of God on account of the things that were dared by them against James, the brother of Jesus. That is what Origen is claiming Josephus said. Josephus did not say that, but you can find that in Hegesippus, and that's what Carrier quotes and shows that these sorts of things are found exactly in Hegesippus. They're not found in Josephus. So all that is required to make sense of what of Origen's saying here is he made a reference mistake.
That just doesn't make sense because he's talking clearly about Josephus, talking about the entire works.
But he's also
that's just
wrong.
such a big mistake to have.
It's actually pretty easy. And again, Origen has made this mistake before.
Wait, but he's talking about Josephus' works in general. He's talking about the entire 20 books.
Which is actually also an interesting thing that you notice, because actually this gets to something else a bit interesting. Josephus also talks about John the Baptist, right?
Yeah.
Now, when Origen cites Josephus on John the Baptist, he says Origen talks about John the Baptist in book 18.
Yeah, right here. John, is this the one? Josephus testifies to John having been a Baptist, promised cleansing to those who were baptized.
Oh, yeah. And right there at the beginning, it says in his 18th volume of Conspiracies of the Jews, he talks about John the Baptist. Yep, that's a reasonable, good citation. Now, notice, though, he actually cites the exact book of Antiquities of the Jews. Origen doesn't actually cite where in Antiquities of the Jews there's this whole James passage. For some reason, Origen doesn't know where it is in this book. Why is it that he could find it for John the Baptist, but now he can't find it for James? That's actually weird.
I don't know. Whatever. That's how you see it. I'm going with what the what experts are telling me, and it makes sense. There's no need to. I'm fine with your interpretation of it. I just don't think it's the more likely.
Well, here's the thing, though. Let's just absolutely stick with the facts. And the facts
I am
are
sticking with the facts.
But here's one of the key facts. Here's one of the key facts. Origen said, Josephus says, the temple was destroyed because of what happens to James. That is a fact of what is being stated.
That's not what he says, though.
It is literally what he says.
No, it's not. He literally says.
Literally is what he said.
He literally actually says, Judaic antiquities in 20 books, wishing to demonstrate the cause of why people do such great things. He literally tells you that's all about the entire book. And then he focuses on, and then he hones in on the James thing because he's a Christian.
But here's the key thing. Josephus said, and I'm going to repeat exactly what's being written here. Josephus said that these things, the destruction of the temple, came to pass against them, the Jews, in accordance with the ire of God, on account of the things which were dared by them against James.
If you want it to sound that way, it will sound that way.
I'm literally reading it. I am not making it sound away. I am literally reading it.
Right. And you remember him saying 20 books, or did he say one book?
He says there's 20 books.
Does he say one passage? Does he say it happened in one passage? Just James?
No. What are you talking about? Here is the key.
He tells you he's demonstrating the cause of why people do such great things throughout 20 books. He tells you that. That's all you need to know. That's what he's leading with that. With that being said, it doesn't matter what he says after that. He can add as much shit as he wants.
But here's the thing. The thing
he's not quoting from anything particular.
No, he is. He says literally right there, Josephus said this. And what does Josephus say? Again, right from the word said, where your mouse is. He said, these things came to pass because of what happened to James. The word said right there is telling us he is getting this from Josephus. And it's not there, therefore he's mistaken.
Right. I said this 3 times. If we're gonna keep going back and forth, I'm just gonna stop. Because James is part of this story, and he's focusing on James more because he's a Christian.
But how much does actually Josephus talk about James? All he says is he was killed, and that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
And then why is Origen saying Josephus says that actually he's part of this much grander event, that what happened was because of what happened to James?
Because Origen's a Christian, and that's what he thinks.
But here's the thing. Origen is saying this is what Josephus said, and that's the problem.
Right, but he opens it up by saying throughout 20 books, he's demonstrating the cause of why people suffered these things. Mm-hmm. And he's basically saying one of them is James.
And that's the thing. One of those things isn't actually what Josephus says. Josephus never says what happened to James was a cause.
It would be nice if he would have said it that way, but he doesn't. Looks like for you, it would be nice if he would have said Eusebius, but he doesn't.
But here's the thing. What we can do is look at what we have. Well, we'll look at the evidence. Does it make more sense that Origen is saying something Josephus didn't actually say, or Origen is mistaken about what
No,
his source
because
was.
the way I'm interpreting it, you don't have to change anything. You can just leave it the way it is, and it still makes sense.
But here's the thing: it says right there,
For
Origen is
you to
claiming
be right,
this is
you
what
have to
Josephus
change
said.
shit. For you to be right, you have to change shit. For me
Well,
to be right, I just leave it the way it is.
Where in Josephus does it say
I
James is
told
the
you
reason
this
the
already.
temple fell?
I told you this already.
The answer is it doesn't. That's the actual fact.
20 books. 20
Where
books.
does it... Okay, this is a very straightforward question. Where does Josephus say James's death caused the destruction?
When Josephus explains that this story is about what led up to the temple falling and why the temple fell. That's the whole point of the story.
Actually, it's not.
Yes, it is.
The story is about the succession of priests.
No, but the whole 20 books is about what happened for the Jews, why they lost their temple, why God promised the temple forever and they lost it. That's what he's trying to tell you.
Now, here's the thing, though. In Josephus, he doesn't actually say that what happened to James was the reason the temple fell.
It's not the only reason, but it's part of the book.
It's not something Josephus says at all. You will not find Josephus saying...
Yeah, but if you take the whole book in context, then you'll understand why he's telling the story this way.
Where, again, this is just totally binary. Does Josephus say the death of James caused the destruction?
No.
Origen says Josephus said that.
Because that's what Origen thinks, because Origen's a Christian.
Well, then he's quoting...
Josephus is not.
Then he's either lying or he's mistaken.
If it said, if you would have a better point if it said that in this one passage in Judaic antiquities, this is what Josephus...
Well, that's actually the other interesting thing. Why can't Origen cite the passage? He doesn't know where it is.
Because
he
he's
knew where
talking
John the
about
Baptist was.
Because he's talking about the entire book.
But here's the thing. Why cite an entire book? But why cite in the entire book if you're talking about one 3-word clause?
It's a bad passage. I get it.
But here's the thing. That's also totally different from how Origen uses Josephus exactly for John the Baptist. He says John the Baptist is described. It's described in book 18. Nice and clear. Here, we don't know where in the book James is supposed to be cited, and he's now being said to be part of the reason the temple fell. And that's not what Josephus says. So, for some reason, he's trying to cite Josephus, but he doesn't know where it says that in Josephus, just somewhere in 20 books, which is, if I told you, Carrier said it somewhere in here, he would tell me to go away. He'd need a better reference than that.
Yeah, but that's how he says it, though. And that's what do you want me to do? There's nothing I can do
But the thing is, though, notice how that's different than when he cites John the Baptist.
But you don't then just change you don't just change it then. Like sure it says what it says.
You change it if it doesn't make sense in context, or you realize there's something else that's wrong, and you have a better hypothesis to explain it. And the hypothesis that he's citing the wrong source.
The text still makes sense the way it is. Because we've
been around this 30 times now.
I know.
At no point at once, ever, and this is a fact, a straight up fact, Josephus never said the death of James caused the destruction. Origen is claiming that, and it's wrong.
Right, but Josephus, like I said this 20 times already, Josephus tells you...
No, instead of saying that again, acknowledge what I just said.
I already did. You're right. He doesn't say that's the only reason. But Origen's talking about
I'm saying Josephus never gives that as a reason at all. Not even a little bit. Not one among many. He never gives it as a reason. Not even a little bit.
Yeah, but that's the whole point of his book. The whole point of the book is to explain what happened.
Right. The whole book is about what happened to the temple, and what happened to James is not given as a reason.
But it's in the story, though.
It's in the story, but it's not the story. But it's not telling us this is why the temple fell.
Yeah, but why wouldn't Origen see it that way? He's a Christian. He thinks it's all about Jesus. Why wouldn't he see it that way?
Here's the thing, though. Origen is telling us this is what Josephus said. Again, that key word, said. Right after the big E1 there. He is saying this is what Josephus says. And Josephus does not say that.
We're just going to keep going in circles about this.
But the problem with reason going in circles is because you are denying a fact.
No, I'm not. I'm going with the data. What the data says.
Well, here's the data. Origen says, Josephus says, the reason the temple was destroyed is because of what happened to James. That is what Origen says Josephus said.
But that's not exactly how he says it, though. He says it.
It's exactly what it says. It says right there, said that these things came to pass.
But he says,
what happened.
Who wrote the Judaic antiquities in 20 books?
You are ignoring what I am saying to say that, hey, there's this whole big book he wrote. Yeah. And he's saying in that big book, he said this. And nowhere in that big book did he say X.
You're whatever. That's how you see it, I guess.
It's not how I see it. It's a fact.
It
Josephus
is how you see it.
Never said that X.
So why does every other expert in this field not see it this way?
Well, have they looked at the evidence like we have?
They've heard this shit a million times. Me and Derek.
Well, here's the thing. Well, first off, we need to point out that you even denied Carrier even wrote an article about this under peer review.
I didn't know he did. And honestly,
but here's the thing: you were denying it right at the beginning. You were claiming that Carrier should have gotten this peer reviewed, and he did.
Because I hear that Carrier had, I don't know, never mind.
Wait, you hear. So we're going by hearsay. That is not good scholarship. Come on, we know better than that.
I'm not a scholar.
You are doing some actually really good stuff on this channel, and I think you should be proud of the stuff you're doing. You are interacting at this at a way higher level than some random layman.
Right. I think it's bunk to say. I think it's some of the shit that he gets peer reviewed is bunk. There you go. And I hear other people say the same thing, and I'm not alone in that. I think it's bunk.
But here's the thing: some people say it's not an argument.
I don't think. Listen. I don't think Carrier gives a shit if there's a Jesus or not. I think he just wants to argue that there isn't. I think he's just on that side. I don't think he cares what the truth is. He just wants to argue for mythicism. He's made it just like a lot of these people who write books for mythicism or who have channels built on mythicism. They become apologists for this thing because they've built their entire identities off of it. So they need it to be true now. They don't care if it's true or not. They don't care what the data says or what experts are saying. They just want whatever out they can get. Like if they can switch up some things here and there, they're going to do it.
Do you think that's
now?
true
I've heard. No, I'm surprised that you, out of all people, are so adamant on like on switching with interpreting what the data actually says. It's surprising to me. I've heard from some people that one of the people who are peer reviewing Carrier is Dr. Robert M. Price.
Why are we going by hearsay instead of data?
That's why I took it on my video, because I can't prove it.
I mean, why even bring it up though?
But if that's the case though, because some of this shit is ridiculous. But if that's the case though, this is the same guy who's giving out honorary PhDs to Ralph Ellis, who thinks that and he's another. He's the other.
You're now going by suppose some hearsay is correct, so let's find other reasons to attack Carrier. Come on, this is now just being a silly personal attack. We can do better than this. Let's just stick with the facts.
Well, why don't if I say it like I'm saying now, maybe someone can prove me wrong. And
wait. Why do you have to be proven wrong? That's the thing, though. We should be trying to actually show what we say is right, not make a claim and then have someone else do the hard work of showing it's wrong.
Well, then
let's do the real work.
Then why are so many people so confident that's the case?
What do you mean?
Like people who bring this information to me are like sure that it's true.
Here's the thing. I've talked to a lot of Christians sure about lots of things. That doesn't make them right. What are the facts? That's what really matters.
I guess that's true. That's why I took it out of my video.
Yeah. And like I say, I
at the end of the day, I want to see.
At the very least, I wouldn't even bring up hearsay.
The only reason why I brought it up, because if that's true, then to me, this is all just a bunch of bullshit. Because now we're just playing games. Well,
here's the thing. If we just go by, if rumors are true, then this, we're going to play all sorts of terrible games. Then we could just say, well, if it's true that there is a giant conspiracy within biblical studies, then we can't trust anything. You wouldn't accept that at all.
Yeah, but what's more likely? Is there a giant conspiracy against mythicism? Or, because I brought this up earlier. Can it be true at the same time that academia is, there's a conspiracy in academia to keep the truth about Jesus and his all the truth about the Bible? It's all true, but academia doesn't want to admit it. And at the same time, academia is against mythicism. Can both those things be true at the same time?
Well, that could be true at the same time, but I think more the question is, are there examples of things happening in academia to suppress mythicist opinions?
Like what? I don't think so.
Well, okay. I guess if we're going to go for examples, are you familiar with the story of Thomas L. Brody?
No, what's that?
So Brody, he is a Dominican. He's actually a Catholic priest, and he and Dennis MacDonald probably did some of the most important work for like developing mimesis criticism.
Okay, now I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And what was it? Maybe a decade or so ago. I forget how long ago. Brody comes out with his memoir book where basically he comes out as a Jesus mythicist. And now you don't hear anything about him again because he basically lives in the Catholic Church, and he's basically told, you're not going to be lecturing anymore, you're not going to have any students anymore. You're basically, you need to be quiet or you're going to be out of the Dominican order. And telling an old man that with no skills that can go into the workforce.
That's the church. That's not academia.
Well, I mean, saying this is an example of this sort of opinion being suppressed.
Yeah, but you can't even. You could be in a church and just say that you think Jesus wasn't the God. Like you could say the Trinity's not right or something. You could get criticized for that. That's not surprising at all.
I could also mention, like, for example, what happened to Christopher Rolston, who was at, I forget which college it was, but he was tenured, and he lost it because he basically made some statements about the Bible not being egalitarian on women's rights, and basically a bunch of the funders for that college came in and said, hey, this is a bunch of bull, you're going to get rid of that guy, you're going to lose funding. And he had to then leave and fortunately find another position. And
right.
If we want to talk even more recently, look what's happened to Emma David Litwa, who's now lost his own academic position.
And I've always brought this up with very conservative Catholic or Christian universities. Yeah, but who's to say about North Carolina or Duke or all these places don't have that going on.
Hopefully not. I would hope not, at least.
They don't.
But I'm just pointing out here are examples of, well, mind you, Litwa was at a Catholic university. So in theory, he should have that sort of academic freedom.
But it's not. It's more complicated than just his ideas. There's more going on there, and it's not just.
You might know more than I do about this because
I do, and it's not what people think. It's not. He wasn't just saying things and they didn't like it and fired him. There was more to it. There's more bullshit going on that the people don't know about.
Okay, but I don't know how much of that you're labeled.
I'm not even going to talk about it. But that's not to say that you're not wrong about these very conservative tight schools. But I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the wide academia as a whole. Like, okay, why isn't it that Carl Ruck, who came on my channel and said he doubts the historicity of Jesus, he even said, I think I'm a mythicist. Mm-hmm. Maybe not the same, like.
Mind you, he's emeritus.
Yeah, no, this is big. This is big. This is somebody who been looking at.
But like I noticed, but he's someone who had to retire before coming out with this.
No, he's still teaching right now.
He's as an emeritus, right?
Yeah, he's still teaching.
Right, but emeritus is basically a retired professor. They have
I think he's.
It usually means you can have some teaching duties, but you're not taking on PhD students. You're not expected to do research. That's usually emeritus status. If we want to talk more research,
why doesn't he lose that? Like where's all the controversy over Carl Ruck and his mythicism? Where's all that? Nobody gave a shit. They're just okay, cool. You think that cool? Because you want to know why? Because Carl Ruck's not going to go around saying that there's a conspiracy against him and he's right and everyone else is wrong. That's the difference between Carl Ruck and Carrier.
Now, here's the thing. I don't want to argue about conspiracies, especially where there's a lack of evidence. Do I think there is a university-wide conspiracy against mythicists? No. What I think there is there are plenty of people in those positions that think so little of it that they don't even want to give it the time of day, and they just go, ugh, every time someone brings it up, and it's like, one more internet mythicist. And I totally understand that attitude, considering how much of the stuff out there is utter garbage. I mean, remember, together, we actually did some debunking of the mythicist crap on Zeitgeist.
Yeah, of course. And mythicism, if you look at the history in the 19th century, 20th century, mythicism was a really strong position for a while.
Depending on where you were.
People have abandoned some of these ideas because they didn't argue, for example, they didn't argue that Paul thought was all myth. They were arguing that this all happened before that. Like, oh, it's all agricultural, stuff like that. like
the dying and rising
golden
stuff.
bug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you also see there's kind of like some overcorrection where people keep saying the dying and rising gods didn't even exist, that was just a false category. But we've both seen the evidence that these concepts absolutely existed. So it's a strange thing to hear Bible scholars just deny that there were dying and rising gods.
Yeah.
That's a weird thing where I just have to think, it's like,
No,
the mythicists are right about this. Why isn't the rest of the academy getting on board?
I can't. Anyone who watches my channel knows that I've always promoted those ideas, and I believe in those ideas. Mm-hmm. Like I did a video about Eshmun and Yasios and Serapis, and like I'm showing you guys that the Christ, not Jesus, the Christ is based off all this Greco-Roman mystery stuff. I believe that still. I'm not holding that. And look, I know that that's not the consensus, but I think it will be one day. Right. And I think mythicism should be taken seriously.
Right.
But if people want it to be taken seriously, I was going to say, if people want it to be taken seriously.
Yeah. And I do believe that that's actually my argument here. I'm not going to even argue that the historicity of Jesus is so lowly probable that it's absolutely absurd that Bible scholars believe that. Because, again, I think there are good reasons to come in and think there is a dude, and it takes a lot of work to come to the mythicist conclusion. Now, I think that's because there are good reasons to, but I also agree that it also takes a lot of legwork. There's a lot of premises that have to be argued in a lot of detail. It is not something that is just a trivial thing, and to either dismiss it like Holocaust denial, or to also say there's just a giant cabal of Catholics running all the universities in the world, and it's just a giant Jesuit conspiracy. I don't believe either of those sorts of things. But it is noteworthy, though, that when the mythicists claim there were dying and rising gods, and then you have people like Bart Ehrman just completely denying it, that seems awkward because we see the evidence with our own eyes. Why is it that we see in the academy this denial of it when it's so
it's apparent? Completely... No, that's completely justified to feel that.
No, actually, I mean, I think we should use this.
You don't even have to be a scholar. Yeah, you don't even have to be a scholar to find this information out.
Right. Yeah, so it's
like
really weird that this gets denied.
You can look at online images of the Temple of Eshmun in Lebanon, and you can look at the inscriptions where it says Eshmun saves, or you could talk, or you could look at the Phoenician inscription that talks about, and you can even if you can read the letters, you could do your own translation where it talks about a start day, rising Eshmun up into heaven, resurrecting him, and then he's coming back down as a healer god.
Yep,
you can see that for yourself. You don't have to. I'm not depending on some scholar for that.
Yeah,
that to me, for someone to not know that or deny that, that is kind of crazy.
Right, I agree. And like I say, I think, though, a reason it's denied is because it's seen as a premise in mythicism. And if you're a Bible scholar and you already think mythicism is Holocaust denial, you are pushing back against all the claims, even to the point of denying the evidence. And that's the problem I see in the academy right now. There's such assuredness about the premise of Jesus existing that these claims or these challenges that the better mythicists make are just not even being addressed. And that, I think, is a failing of the academy. And I honestly want this to happen. I want the academy to take it seriously, to also see here's what also is going on, and then use that to maybe a greater historicity thesis to better explain how the religion came about, assuming there was a guy. I think mythicism provides challenges that should force historicity to improve if it is the correct theory. And if historicity is false, then we move on to a new paradigm. To me, it's basically Copernicus coming in. Do we just steadfastly stay with the Ptolemaic system, or do we at least try a different astronomical system to match the data? And now, one of them might be right.
The last thing I want to have a little discussion on, and then because I think we agree on most of the stuff we're saying now.
Yeah.
But what do you because you're all about the data, and you're a data scientist. Now, what do you say for the nobody's contesting that this guy existed, even Jewish sources, even Talmud. We were talking about this, how the Talmud has this weird thing where they keep saying it happened at the time of Alexander Jannaeus, but everyone kind of knows that this is the same Jesus.
Well, actually, let's talk about that because it is
Let's do
such
it.
a weird thing.
It
And
is.
right now, I don't see a good explanation for this on historicity. And on mythicism, I can make much more sense of it, which is one of the reasons I considered evidence for mythicism. It seems more likely on that. Now, that also means if a historist or a scholar can come along and explain this at least as well as I can, that will be awesome and it will advance the field. And that's what I want to see happen. Now, let's let the audience know what the hell we're talking about again. What do you mean Talmud Jesus? So,
Yeah.
in
So,
the
well,
two...
go
Oh,
ahead.
if you want to go ahead
Go
and
ahead.
explain.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So the key thing is when we are looking for outside references to Jesus, obviously we've talked about Josephus to death. I'm pretty sure Josephus is rolling in his grave about all this. But if we move on to other Jews that may have talked about Jesus, there does seem to be mention of our friend Jesus in both the Babylonian and the Jerusalem Talmud. Now, people will say, well, the Talmud itself is composed in or at least compiled in like the 5th, 6th centuries AD. It's so late, but this has some older sources. And either way, we want to look at this and see what was their view of Jesus. And the weird thing is, in multiple tracts within both Talmuds, they seem to place Jesus about a century before Jesus.
Not in all the text, though.
Which
There
one?
are some. There are the ones that they use his name as Jesus ben Pantera. Have him in the first. Have him in Sepphoris, which is literally Nazareth. Like, I was just there. I'm not kidding. You can.
Yeah.
It's one. You got a hill here. You got a hill there. Sepphoris. You could throw a rock at each other. It's the same place.
Yeah, they're definitely nearby each other, but saying it's taking place in Sepphoris doesn't put it in the same
Well,
time as
Sepphoris
the
is
gospel
the
story.
greater region too. So
Yeah,
Sepphoris
but
could
here's the
include
thing.
Nazareth.
Telling me it's in Sepphoris doesn't tell me the time it takes place. And in
Well,
all
it
these
does.
narratives...
No, it does, because it talks about the rabbis that were around that time, and it's talking about like 30s, 40s, 50s area region, because it's talking about it's talking about Jesus already being dead. It's talking about one of his followers named Jacob, who was healing in his name. Supposedly it worked. They're like, oh wait, maybe there's something to this thing.
Okay,
And
well,
then
in that
all of a
case, we're
sudden-
not talking about Jesus. We're talking about Jesus's later day followers. But the story of Jesus, and here's the weird thing. In many, many places in the Talmud, it places Jesus during the reign of Alexander Jannaeus, who was a king of the Jews, reigning roughly around 100 BC to 70 BC. Which would
when
put
it talks
him-
about his trial, it puts him in that day. I've heard a theory on this from two different people, actually. One of them is a good scholar. Wait, was it it was either Tabor or Schaefer that he was referring to, Schaefer saying this. But also some rabbis say this too, that the earliest Talmud that we have in physical copy is from like the 13th century. And before that, a lot of changing had been done. Well, they're living under the Romans, and so they're being persecuted for the blasphemy. You would die for blasphemy. So a way around that is to redate the text, and so they don't die now. They can keep the text there and don't die. That's a possibility.
Yeah, but the problem with that explanation is, one, we see it in both Talmuds, including the Babylonian Talmud, which was composed outside of Roman control.
Right, but I think the Babylonian Talmud follows them into Roman lands.
Eventually it does, but we can see, though, if it's showing up in both Talmuds, that's really coordinated changing, and that's a conspiracy.
Yeah, no, that would make sense that they would do that, though.
But here's the thing: having a conspiracy at this scale is pretty.
I'm not going to die on that. I'm not going to die on that hill. So I'm just going to leave
and the other reason this doesn't work well is that we actually know of Christians who believe this as well. In the works of Epiphanius, he actually says that there was this group of Christians known as the Nazareans, and they believed that Jesus basically was the last true king of the Davidic line and died during the reign of Alexander Jannaeus.
Right. Yeah.
So that's multiple
I've heard
sources.
another person say. I heard what's his name? I just had him on my channel. Like 2 weeks ago. Oh my God! Hold on, just give me 1 second. I'll look at it right now. I'm having a huge brain screw up. Hold on, I'm sorry about this.
It's okay.
It is Bruce Kilton.
Okay.
Bruce Kilton thinks that it's possible Alexander Jannaeus is the last of the Maccabees. He establishes the Sanhedrin, which passes down into the Herods. The Herods are the last people to have the same Sanhedrin that was set up by Alexander Jannaeus. This is the same Sanhedrin that treated the Jesus case. So if it's under this Alexander Jannaeus government, maybe they're talking about the government that he set up. That's a possibility.
The problem, though, is that if we look at the narratives, it actually has Jesus running away with the Nazi of the League to Egypt, and we are told the name of that person, and that person was also literally running away from Alexander Jannaeus. So the story itself places it.
Which one is this?
Let me bring up the correct reference. I have it in my blog, so
this might be one I haven't seen yet.
Yeah, let me get to the right place. This is according to Sanhedrin 107b. We're told that Jesus goes along with Joshua ben Parachia. I'm sorry that my Hebrew is so terrible in pronunciation. So Joshua ben Parachia, he is the Nasi during the 2nd century BC. And according to the narrative, both Jesus and this Joshua go to Egypt together because they are escaping King Jannaeus.
Now, is this the same? How do you know this is the Jesus that they're talking about?
It says, I forget if it said Jesus of Nazareth or Jesus ben Pantera. Let me triple check.
Yeah.
Let me go to the correct reference. Because this is, like I say, this is in the Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 107b. For all the people at home who want to follow along.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So let me find our friend JC again. I'll probably have to share my screen once.
There's a lot of Jesuses. There's a lot of Jesuses in the Talmud.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of Jesse's, Jesus's, Joshua's.
Right.
Right here it says actually Jesus of Nazareth.
Oh wow. So there's That's interesting.
Yeah. So like I say, that explanation doesn't then fit. It doesn't fit what the Talmud says, and it doesn't fit what Epiphanius says.
No, it makes no sense. But and the Talmud's very weird like this. The whole thing doesn't. Unless you're an expert in the Talmud, you're just looking at stuff that's completely foreign to what you know when you start reading this stuff. It's a lot of parables and stuff. But anyways, let's get right to it. Because seriously though, we have a Jesus of Nazareth whose mother is named Mary, whose father is questionable, who is hung on Passover Eve for leading Israel astray, and he leads a movement that continues after he's dead.
Yes.
Is it even possible? You're the data scientist. I'm not. Is it even possible that we talk about two different Jesuses?
That would be a coincidence beyond calculation.
Beyond calculation.
Yeah. And yet he's a century in the past.
I admit it's a really weird thing, but I don't think it should be abandoned or just discarded. I think we're talking about some history here. But
how can it? It's literally impossible for Jesus to be in both times.
But here we have these people, these Jews, they lose their government, so they're not going to have written records that are going to be easily contained within some temple somewhere. Like they're like keeping these things like in houses and stuff, and they're going back and forth from Babylon and Jerusalem, and that's why you have these Talmud things set up, right? Now they're keeping really good records. They have quotes from rabbis from the 2nd century BC, quotes from rabbis from the 1st century BC, quotes from rabbis in the all the way up to the present day. They have quotes from rabbis going back all the way. They're keeping records. They're keeping genealogies. They're keeping things together. Don't you think someone would say Jesus of Nazareth does not exist? He's a myth. Somebody made him up. But no one says that.
Well, here's the thing, though. We still, like I said, I want to stick with this right now because what is the historicity explanation for having Jesus a century in the past?
The only thing I can think of is not to get killed for blasphemy.
But it doesn't fit all the data. It doesn't explain Epiphanius, for example. That's a literal belief by Christians, that Jesus died around the reign of Alexander Jannaeus. That's actually believed by some Christians, according to Epiphanius.
It's something I want to explore now. Like I want to find out.
I have a link to the passage in my blog post as well. So,
but think about this. If this is going to sound crazy, but I'm just gonna. This is how I am. I have to explore things, even if it sounds crazy. I have to look at it. If he really was a guy that lived this time period, does that mean historicity and mythicism are both wrong?
Well, here's how I think it would work on mythicism. Here's my idea. So if originally the idea of Jesus that he was some sort of cosmic figure, and then later was put into stories in history, different groups will place him in different histories because they're not coordinating with each other. Now, why would they choose the particular times that they do? I have an interesting guess for that, but I haven't done anything that passes peer review. But my guess is the way they figured out when Jesus actually was, and notice these square quotes, these scare quotes, is they were using the 70 weeks of years prophecy from Daniel and using that to try to predict when the Messiah was supposed to come. I played around with that, and with the same sorts of assumptions that Christians were making. First off, the Christians themselves actually used the Daniel week of years prophecy to say that Jesus died during the reign of Pontius Pilate. You find that in Julius Africanus, for example. He literally does the calculation to show that at least some Christians were doing that. I suppose, what if Christians did it with slightly different starting assumptions? And one of the ways I found out is that it predicts that the Messiah would come in the year 103 BC, the beginning of Jannaeus' reign.
See, I like this. I like this. This is like something that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, like I said, this is not something I've had go through peer review, so if I tried articulating it in a journal form and get feedback there, I might have to change my mind. But this is an example of how potentially you could go from cosmic Christ to Christ in history by people using their same sort of Pesher or Midrash logic, all the sort of Bible code stuff, and then using that to predict when Jesus was, quote unquote, supposed to have existed, and then write the story based on that. In the same sort of way how Jesus was supposed to come from Bethlehem because of prophecy, for example.
Yeah, but why would that happen in the Talmud, though?
Well, because what I would suppose is this might actually be something that was created by some of the early Jewish Christians in that church that basically disappeared after the end of the Jewish War.
And you think those fragments get passed on into Babylon and get put into the Talmud, and the scribes just putting down what they have? That's a lot of people, and a lot of the Talmud is exactly that, by the way.
Yeah, it's something like that. It seems like this must have been the idea that was circulating amongst Jewish Christians, because again, Epiphanius tells us this was the belief of the Nazareans, and he also says these Nazareans still hold to the Jewish law. They're basically Jewish Christians. If there were other Jewish Christians in Babylon or elsewhere in Palestine, and this was the version of Jesus they talked about during Jannaeus' reign, and that's what the Talmudic rabbis heard, that might explain this weirdness.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's very strange. I'm not gonna lie.
And that's why I
wish it was
because,
more clear.
Yeah,
but it does seem like they're referring to an event that happened, but the dates are off, and that's
totally.
That's
yeah. Well, not only just the dates, but also the political context. I mean, this is literally taking place not only before the Roman Empire, it's even happening before like the reign of Julius Caesar. And it would be a really weird thing if you remembered Jesus saying, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's," but you put it in a context before there's even a Caesar.
Well, yeah, because if it happened in the time of Jannaeus, that would mean that there would still be, would it be the Seleucids that would still controlling that region? Or it's the it's not the Parthians yet, it's Seleucids, I think.
Well, during Jannaeus' reign, they're independent of both the Ptolemies and the Seleucids.
Yeah, so the Seleucids are falling apart.
Yeah.
The Mithridates' kingdom is starting to grow in Pontus, in Asia. Yeah. And that's when Pompey the Great comes through around 67, 66, 66.
Somewhere in the 60s,
through the whole... Yeah. And then that's when you get Julius Caesar after that. But the whole point is, this is before all that shit.
Yeah. This is taking place at a time where Julius Caesar is at best in diapers.
Yeah. Yeah, he would have been... No, you know what it would have been? It would have been during Sulla. And Sulla...
I think you're right,
threatened... Yeah, Sulla was the first one to cross the Rubicon. And he threatened to kill Caesar. If Caesar... He told Caesar to... Because Caesar was royal... He was a royal patronage. And
yep. Yeah, Julian Claudius. Yeah.
Yeah, he had to divorce his wife, or he was going to kill him. So Caesar had to flee for that. But anyways, that's all side stuff. But the whole point of me saying all that is because the time period is so weird. Because why would this all be? It just I don't know. It
Right.
doesn't make sense.
And this is like I say, this is my challenge to mainstream scholarship and historicity in general. This I can make more sense on mythicism, that there was a mythical Jesus and then different people put him in history differently, and that's why they don't line up. That makes sense. On
Yeah,
historicity,
but I just
how
don't
do
see
people
why
screw
the
up by a
Jews would
century?
do that. No, I
Well,
get
the
that.
thing
But I
is,
just don't see.
my claim isn't that the Jews did this. My claim is another group of Christians, and the group of Christians that the Jews at the Talmud knew said this. That this was basically, there was a group of Christians who had a different version of the gospel than the ones that we see in the modern New Testament. And in their version of the gospel, Jesus was running around during the days of Alexander Jannaeus.
Well, that's an interesting take.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Well, like I say,
I'm
my
not
question
sure if it
though
makes
is
sense to
how,
mythicism.
well, the reason I say it makes sense on mythicism is that if a person isn't historically real and people take different stabs on when he actually existed, they're not going to coordinate well. If there was a historical dude, you wouldn't expect people to be off by a century.
No, you would. I mean, it doesn't make sense. I mean, but you do have historical evidence. Actually, it's a historical fact that Jews were killed for blasphemy for talking about Jesus in a bad way.
Yeah.
We have evidence. I could show you examples of this, and it's from the Talmud. And it's from the Talmud. So
No doubt.
now take that in consideration. Put that in the back burner now. Now here's the kicker. We don't know of any Talmud records before the 13th century. We have no idea what those Talmud's versions say. So we don't know how much coordination and change could have happened for 1,000 years. 1,000 years.
But remember,
So
though,
it's plausible
there's
they could
one
have
other
changed
detail.
things.
There's one more detail, though. Remember also the testimony from Epiphanius, who tells us that there were Jewish Christians in the 4th century that also believed the same thing.
Yeah, I have to look into that again. That's interesting. You're right. That's an interesting point. That's an interesting point.
So and like I say, and this is why I'm like, we need, if historicity is correct, we need an explanation for this weirdness. And the fact that I can't find one that actually matches up with all the evidence screams out for an explanation. So I would challenge historians to come up with an explanation for all this data, so that way we can move forward, or otherwise say this is at least more explicable on mythicism, because on historicity you can't have Jesus in 2 different centuries.
Right. Wasn't there
Not to
another
mention
thing
all
that
the other times that people put Jesus, like if you look also in Irenaeus, he also puts Jesus later than the Gospels do. And I also have argued that potentially those dates were also chosen for using the Daniel 70 weeks of years prophecy.
Well, I talked to Mike Lawrence, mythicist, who doesn't get any credit. He doesn't get any credibility because he doesn't have a PhD or whatever. I don't know. I think he's a really smart dude. I think he makes a good case for mythicism. And he thinks that the dates from the time he's born to the time he dies, you have 2 significant 70 years for the temple, just like it says in Daniel and Jeremiah. And then 40 years from the time Jesus is gone, you have 40 years in the wilderness before the temple falls. Mm-hmm. You're without your Messiah for 40 years. You're alone in the wilderness. So you're with your Messiah for 30 years, 70 years before the temple. And then when he dies, you have 40 more years left in the wilderness. Mm-hmm. Those dates match up pretty good. So you can argue that there's either a really big coincidence or it was placed that way. But it's one or the other.
When there are coincidences like that, they're interesting, though I will slightly push against that coincidence just because the Gospels are not clear on what year Jesus is killed, and that 40 years only works if Jesus is specifically killed in the year 30, and the Gospels don't make that straightforwardly clear.
Right. Yeah, you have to go with, well, they kind of hint at that, though, because they do say it happens under Pilate.
Yeah, but he reigns for about a 10-year period. You can't get it down to a particular year based on that.
But you get the 14th year of Tiberius in there, so you sort of get it pinpointed. You get the 30th year, he gets baptized. So you're close. They get you close.
Yeah, well, actually, there's a few things that make this a little bit complicated. One is that, it says in such and such year of Tiberius, I'm forgetting the exact numbers, but in the beginning of Luke chapter 3, it says that John the Baptist started in such and such year during the reign of Tiberius. Jesus comes, he's about 30 years old. But we actually don't know when Jesus comes to John the Baptist. Does he come a week after he opened shop? Or has John the Baptist been running the show for 10 years? We actually can't tell from the story. And we also don't know how long Jesus' ministry is. So again, you can't really pinpoint an exact year based on this. Now, because I've looked into this, this is where astronomy comes in. Now I can use the background.
Nice.
So if you take the statements about how Jesus is killed either like the day before Passover or on Passover, either the day before Passover or 2 days before, depending on if you use the Synoptics or John. If you say then Jesus was born on a Sunday, or it's not born on a Sunday, he was resurrected on a Sunday, that whole 3 days thing, and how it lines up with the Sabbaths, how it lines up with Passover, et cetera, you can actually figure out what dates can fit those criteria using astronomy, because the Jewish calendar at this time is completely based on observations of the moon. And we can project what the moon looked like on any given night, and then figure out when would have been the 1st of Nisan, and then you can figure out when the 14th of Nisan would be, and see, is that 3 days before Sunday, blah, 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 blah. And then you can have some criteria, and then you find that like the only 2 years that really match up with this is the year 30 and 33, based on the astronomical data. But complication, there's always complications with this study. This only works with the Johannine chronology, where Jesus isn't killed on the, I'm getting the dates mixed up. If John said the 15th, John said that Jesus was killed on the 15th of Passover rather than the 14th, which is alluded to in all the synoptics. So you have to take John's chronology to even have any candidate work, which is strange.
Yeah.
But this is a whole nother tangent, which might be a fun video in itself, because you might know this, but I kind of like astronomy.
Yeah, I know. I do too. Let's take a break for a second and read some of these super chats out, and I've been holding. Yeah, thank you, Sabra, for the super chat. It's this simple: if Jesus didn't possess every single trait that almost all Christians would use to describe Jesus, then he didn't exist. Christians don't worship just some guys that did some things.
Well,
no. This is actually not a bad point, because
there is the philosophical point of how much of the Jesus story needs to be true to say there was an historical Jesus.
I've been saying this forever, and I stand by it.
Yeah.
But so much of the Gospels are myth that doesn't, like, even if there was just a guy, doesn't matter what his name is, who was crucified under Pilate. Is mythicism still true? Kind of. If there's a guy named Jesus who got crucified, that's all that happened. That's the only thing that happened that the Gospels get right. Is mythicism still wrong? Not really. That's all. I think that's a good point.
Yeah. And it is also worth noting to the audience in general that when we are talking about the historical Jesus, we are not talking about the whiz-bang Superman of the Gospels. We're just talking about, was there a dude that basically things got out of control and he basically became master of the universe in later stories? But originally, he was just some guy who got himself on the wrong side of the law, ultimately.
Yeah. Omegia. Thank you for the super chat. I think you should have just made your points but left out the slightly repetitive clown Joker stuff. It made everything a little inflammatory. Oh, that's thank you for your feedback. Sure, I liked it. I think it adds a little bit of.
Well, I would add though that it does kind of have a tonal imbalance if you say Carrier makes good points, mythicism is plausible, and Carrier is a total clown and the idea is ridiculous. That doesn't really jive.
I don't care what his ideas are that I disagree with. I just think that when he then says, when people disagree with him or think that he's wrong or think that he's off, then he'll just say, they're all, they're theists or they're insane. They're literally insane because they don't, whatever. Like that's, you look like a clown. You look like the Joker. Like you look like you're like, the reason why I picked the Joker is because he sort of fits that role where he's like, all academia is all against me. And it's like, I'm over here, like in my laboratory, like, hey, like that's what it feels like. Like you're singling yourself out. You're making it seem like that no one wants to deal with you when you do that. That's all I'm saying.
And I do want to say that I do think Carrier's rhetoric has not done what he wants it to do. It is not making academia want to treat him more seriously or his thesis more seriously, which is also one of the reasons I'm here taking a very different approach than what Richard Carey would do. I still believe in having these sorts of conversations, even with people I disagree with, who I think have made arguments that are bad and should have been done better. I still think that I can say, hey, your argument is bad, but I'm going to still argue with you rather than drag you through the mud as much as I can. I'm trying to take a different approach. I can understand why Carrier does that, but I don't think he's ultimately helping himself.
And even if there were examples of, academics who are shitting on Carrier for no reason, and he just kept it in stride, he would look so much better instead of going the other route and trying to be like, oh, this person's a crazy person. They said this, or he should never be.
Wait, are you suggesting we should turn the other cheek? Where have I heard that?
I guess. I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying he shouldn't be able to refute people. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
But I think you get what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to talk about it anymore.
Right.
Paul Kickling, thank you for the super chat. Why do mythicists ignore Docetism? Even if Christ came as a spirit in the mind of the apostles, the Platonic world is realer than our fake world. So if he came in the flesh, he would be less real, ironically. But you know what, though? This is a good point, because where's the mythicism in the books of Irenaeus and Hippolytus?
Well, they are, of course, saying that the Gospels are the authorities in these sorts of matters, so they're going to follow that. But more importantly, if you look at Irenaeus, he also talks about how Jesus, rises through the heavens, and he has to pass through the gates to get through all the heavenly levels to return back to the throne of the Almighty. So those sorts of mythical elements still exist in there. And not to mention, all the Christians definitely believe in demons and Satan and all those things. They're not a bunch of secularists. Not even close.
No, not at all. But what I'm saying is, if mythicism was the original Christianity, that's how it started off. You would think that this would be a what's the word for it?
That there'd be some remnant?
Heresy. There'd be a heresy. This would be a heresy.
Well, the thing is, though, there might be some signs of this. So, for example, it's actually interesting that Paul brings up Docetism. And if you look, for example, at the letters of not Irenaeus, Ignatius. So the Ignatian letters, a lot of scholars will say Ignatius is, at least one of his targets, are Docetists. But the thing is that's a bit interesting is, our idea of what a Docetus is Jesus is here on earth, but only in ghost form. That you only see basically an image. He only seems to be here. But the interesting thing, though, is when Ignatius is arguing against whoever he's going against, he is also saying, how dare they not say, or how dare they not believe that Jesus was actually born of Mary, that he was actually crucified under Pontius Pilate? Why are they specifying these very particular time markers if the Docetists are just disagreeing on whether Jesus actually suffered or not? To say that the Docetists, or whatever his opponents are, don't believe that Jesus was there during Pilate's time, this sounds like he's attacking some other different group that doesn't actually have a more historically grounded version of their Jesus. But this is a little bit speculative on who the targets of Ignatius really were.
Yeah, no, I just I think if you had this thing going on before Mark wrote his gospel, I think you would find it in the heresies. I mean,
mind you though, all the heresies that we know about, if you look at all the heresiology books that we have, whether it's Irenaeus, whether it's Tertullian, etc., if you look at the oldest heresy people that they actually quote, they're all from the 2nd century or later. We don't have any 1st century heretics.
Well, they do say that the Ebionites are heretics, and they talk about the Ebionites being in the 1st century. But
all the stuff that's supposed to be quoted from the Ebionites is what the Ebionites are claiming in the 2nd century. We don't actually have anyone saying, here was a heretic in the 50s saying these sorts of things.
Right.
We don't have that.
Yeah, you don't have anything like that. No, that's true. That's true.
So, like I say, there's this hidden gap of where we just don't really have good documentation at all. And this is maybe where all the mystery stuff happens. It's basically the big question mark in what happened in Christianity and how it developed, and we're just trying to use 2nd century and later data to try to project back the best that we can. Now, we have some 1st century data. We obviously have the letters of Paul. And then, of course, well, how about, would you want to argue until we're blue in the face about what Paul actually said?
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously that becomes another can of worms. And how we interpret Paul, then we might say, well, how did other people interpret Paul? Well, who was interpreting Paul in the 1st century? Oh, we got the same problem. Pretty much all the interpreters of Paul that we know are interpreting Paul are 2nd century and later, which again is after the time that mythicism may have become the forgotten heresy in a sense.
It's possible. Robert Herring, thank you for the $2 super chat. Sending love. Happy you're better. I'm getting there. I'm still a little out of it. Still a little sweaty.
Honestly, you sound good though. I'm glad you're feeling better though.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely good enough to be doing this. That's for sure.
Very good.
Christine Wilson, thank you for joining and becoming a member. Appreciate that. This is a weird video to join at me. I'm probably not my best self. I'm yelling at you and you're yelling at me, but
no, people are here for the drama. I'm going to go get some popcorn right now.
No, and that's exactly how I am. If I'm talking sports with my cousin or brother, I get the same way. I start getting loud. I'm from New York. This is how we are here. It's not like I don't care. I don't take this seriously. I could be wrong about shit. Like, like I'm just arguing what I think. And that's just how it comes off. Maybe some people might think it sounds crazy, but that's just the nature of me. So, and right. I think you picked up. I think you know that about me. So that's why.
So what you're saying is the next stream we need to be shouting at each other about the Buffalo Bills.
Yes.
By the way, I don't even know what a Buffalo Bill is, so I'm going to be terrible at that argument.
I forgot what they named it after. Oh, some guy. It was a guy. It was a person. There was a person. Yeah. It's back in some time period. I don't know. But I remember reading about that. Yeah. Most people in Buffalo don't know that. Yeah. Most people in Buffalo are like, oh, I have no idea.
And I'm here in Boston. I have no idea what a Bruin is. Is it a bear? Is it a bagel? I honestly don't know.
Bruin? Yeah, I always wondered that. I think it's a bear, right?
You might be right, but honestly, without looking at Wikipedia, I don't know. Sports. That's the real mystery religion to me.
Yeah. Then you have like what is it called? There's some weird names out there. But yeah, whatever. I'm just so out of it right now that I can't even think of it.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's see what the next one says. There's a couple more, I think. Damn, there's a lot of comments. I'm scrolling through these comments. Whew. Here we go. Liren Shoham. Thank you for the super chat. Adair follows the consensus when it's convenient to him. Academic hypocrisy.
I try to see where the evidence is, and if I disagree with it, then I try to do my research. Now, I think what Liram is coming in is that when I've gone on like this channel or Jacob Berman's channel to argue against Electric Universe, Liram sees that as far more plausible than I do. And the thing is, the Electric Universe people, it's not that they're outside of academics and they're heretics, it's that they just don't know shit. I have to be absolutely honest about it. They don't know shit. The people who promote Electric Universe stuff aren't physicists, don't know physics, and have to make blindingly absurd things about that. So it's not a matter that I just stick with the consensus, is that, hey, they make claims about the sun that we can test are wrong, literally sitting in our living rooms. We don't need a particle accelerator and an academic consensus to see it's a bunch of bull hockey. Sorry, I have nothing kind to say about Electric Universe ideas.
Yeah. I used to like that shit when I was back in my just leaving the church, but still thinking something exists. Electric Universe is perfect because it sounded sciencey. It sounded like there was explanations behind shit, but it still had something. It still was like, ooh, the universe is everything means something. For like, it didn't take me long. It's in fact, what's his name? He has that channel. He debunks it so good.
Oh, Professor Dave explains.
Professor Dave explained. That's how I found him. I found him through looking up the Electric Universe shit. I wanted to learn more about it, and then all of a sudden he comes in the algorithm like, listen up, bitch. Like he just shut the whole thing down. I was like, this dude just debunked the whole thing. Yeah. I can't even look at that anymore. So now he's good. He's good. Professor Dave.
Yeah.
But
and the key thing, though, is the reason I follow the academic consensus on that point is here are basically science has an advantage that religion and history don't have, is that science can usually go and collect more evidence. The historian is kind of already limited to like what's already been collected from the past. Like the chances that we're going to get another encyclopedia from the first century of data is unfortunately low. Do we want to get better pictures of the stars? We can build a new telescope and do that. We just did this last year. That's something that, science has and that history wish it could have that quality of data. Now, I'm not saying that history can't make any conclusions. I'm just pointing out that one of the reasons science is so successful is its ability to get extremely precise data in large quantities, and scientists to then come together to figure out what data they need to argue between competing hypotheses and do the crucial experiments. That is just harder to do in history. It's not the fault of the historians. It's just a matter of what kind of data can exist in these two fields.
Yeah, and honestly, I follow the consensus because I'm not an expert. So, but doesn't mean that I don't hold positions that aren't consensus. I hold a lot of positions that aren't consensus.
Yeah.
But I also try my best to understand why my position's not the consensus, and I don't try to say that I'm right and they're all wrong. And I don't look for that. And look at and that's not to say that I can find a scholar that agrees with my position. I don't just pull that card out every time. Look, he said it. It's true. Like, exactly. I don't do that. I just feel like people should stop doing that. But, anyways.
Yeah, and I should also repeat that if you were a new person coming to this whole Jesus mythicism debate, if this was completely new to you, what would I tell you? Hey, here's the consensus view. They actually have lots of good prima facie reasons for that. If you want to become a mythicist, you're going to have to listen to these minority groups a lot. So only if you want to deep dive should you even consider mythicism. Otherwise, stick with the consensus, because that is the responsible thing to do, unless you really want to learn the languages, the materials, the sources, and get down in the dirty and read all of the top-level scholarship on the subject. If you're not willing to do that, then you should probably pause and just say, at the consensus level. That's my general approach.
Yeah, and because you get a lot of mythicists that are not, they don't know the material, like, they're just like they think it's all astrotheology or some Pythagorean, like they're totally in some other camp, but they think that like that's what mythicism is. I get a lot of comments like that, and that's people are in their own lane sometimes, Mm-hmm. Philip, thank you for the super chat. Do we have complete copies of all 20 Josephus's books?
Yes,
yeah, we do, but we don't know what
we have quite a few.
We don't know how much
of it.
Yeah.
I think the oldest manuscripts are like from around 1000. I think that's the oldest copies we have, but we have quite a few different copies in multiple languages, and of course we have quotes and references earlier than that as well. So I'm
looking through some of these I'm looking through some of these comments, and that's just funny to me how emotional people are about mythicism. Like, what is it about this idea that you have to get like so you get so mad at me about?
Yeah, I'd have to say that this does exist, unfortunately, on both sides, and I think it's one of the reasons it's so hard to make progress on this question, because if both sides are getting entrenched,
sorry that I'm not an expert, and I'm going with what's the likely scenario for what people who I trust in say.
Right.
Like I do this for everything. I don't do just for Bible study. I do this for climate change. I do this for political science too. I go to the experts. Look, I went to school for economics. I know a little bit of economics, but bachelor's level economics is not the same as PhD level economics. Mm-hmm. So I'm not an expert in economics. You're not going to come to me and get. I still have to go to other people above me to get real good information. So I'm not going to sit here and be like, yeah, I went to University of Buffalo for economics. I know everything about economics. I don't know shit. I know the lingo. I can hold my own in a conversation about it.
Yeah, but I mean, quite honestly, when if I go to a physics conference and I have a PhD in physics and I still don't know what the fuck most people are talking about, there's so much esoteric stuff that you have to really deep dive into to understand what's going on in a lot of these fields. And when it comes to, and I should also note with biblical studies. Again, do I have a degree in biblical studies? No. Do I have a degree in classics? No. Should I be listened to? Definitely not based on credentials. All I can claim is that I'm basically an advanced novice. who has published in the history of religion journals, in biblical studies journals, and I've participated at SBL. In fact, I'm going to be flying there in about a week and a half. So I'm at least trying to participate in that academic conversation, though admittedly as an outsider, so I'm also usually very, not kowtowing to others, but very cautious in the claims I make and the feedback I want to receive from academics on my ideas.
Yeah, I hope it goes well. We'll see what happens. Paul Kickling says, mythicists somehow believe more evidence for Christian doctrine outside of Christianity means it's less true. Looks like all other mythicism agree with Christianity.
I'm trying to interpret this, and maybe he's referring to like the evidence from the Talmud and from Josephus and things like that.
Or maybe like prophetic shit, like he should come from Nazareth. Like I've heard this case made by mythicists, especially because Bart Ehrman talks about how there is no evidence for a prophecy about a guy coming from Nazareth.
Yeah,
he should, he's the Davidic covenant comes from Bethlehem. He's got to be born in Bethlehem. So they try to fix that in the gospel. Well, I've heard mythicists say, but it says right in the text that the prophets say it shall come from Nazareth. But it only shows that in Christian texts. We don't see that in any other text before that. So I think what Paul's saying is like, oh, look, the Christians, mythicists agree with Christians because Christians will say there has to be a text because the Bible says there is.
Well, I think, Paul, though, because he's talking about evidence for Christian doctrine outside of Christianity, so like the Talmud, for example, I think that's what he's talking about.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, like, the prophets saying that the Messiah is going to come from Nazareth, that would be outside of Christianity, right?
Or before Christianity, because at least in theory, Matthew thinks he's quoting from the Old Testament.
Right.
Now, where is this quote coming from? Obviously, that's the big mystery because, yeah, people have been searching the Old Testament pretty hard, and at least that doesn't say there. So there's hypotheses about how that could have happened. Maybe there was some other manuscript tradition.
Don't you think that's another strong case for historicism? Like, why would that be? What's the point of the whole Nazareth thing?
Well, if they're saying it's according to prophecy, then that must be why. Otherwise, they're lying about there being a prophecy, and that's not going to fly.
Yeah, I think that's more likely that they're making up the guy came from Nazareth, so now they have to explain it away, and so they'll just say, "Yeah, there was a prophecy."
Okay, so actually, here's an idea, a way of when it comes to like comparing the hypotheses. So the two hypotheses are there was an historical Jesus and he came from Nazareth. On the mythicist point of view is there was an historical Jesus, but there was this idea that the Messiah has to be a quote-unquote Nazarene. And then going for some text that says he will be a Nazarene.
What text do we see anything like that?
Well, I'm saying that here's how it would work on mythicism. This would be like the two hypotheses to explain the same evidence. So saying that there's a prophecy that says he will be a Nazarene when this prophecy doesn't actually exist as seen, then either they have to be making up to explain he comes from Nazareth, or they have to be making up to explain why Jesus has this title of Nazarene.
Yeah, but if he's a myth, then you
but
don't
he's
have
also
to add
has
that.
like. But here's the thing: he's a myth, and he has all sorts of other titles. You know, the logos and things like that. How do we explain that, for example?
Yeah, he doesn't really. The logos thing kind of. That's like philosophy that gets tossed in. It's the Peripatetic school, the Philos, like.
Yeah, but nonetheless, it is one of the titles of Jesus, and it is not a title he has because he comes from the town of Logos.
Right, but Nazareth, early on, within
but
the
mind
first
you, though,
gospel,
the prophecy does not say he will come from Nazareth. The exact wording is he will be a Nazarene.
True.
And the word there, Nazarene, isn't actually the word you would use to say someone from a town of Nazareth. It doesn't have that structure. This sounds like it's some other different title. And what it actually means is unclear.
Really? You really think that? Where do you get? This is another example to me where it seems like we're just adding stuff that doesn't have to be there.
Well, here's the thing, though. Like I say, grammatically, here's the difference. Like, if I want to say Socrates was an Athenian, there's a particular way of how you write Athenian. And that structure of how you designate a person's town from isn't being used here for Nazareth.
But how do you know that's not the way to say he's a Nazarene?
Well, I mean, this is Greek grammar. That's just straightforward.
Yeah, but where else in Greek do you see people talk about people from Nazareth? You don't really see it.
But we know grammar. That's the key thing. Even if a new word comes, it still follows grammar laws.
Right, but it's also coming from a. It's also talking about a place, so it's not like.
Well, no, though the key thing is, it doesn't look like it's being treated as a place in this prophecy. They're saying he will be a Nazarene isn't
Now,
the
how do
same
you know
thing as saying he will come from Nazareth.
All right, so where are you getting this information from? You know Greek really well?
I've studied it, yeah, and I have a grammar book I could go grab later for those constructions.
I'm a beginner. I know a little bit.
Mhm.
I would have to. I want to see what this. Is there any Greek experts that are saying this? Is there anyone? Maybe I'm not saying there isn't. I'm just asking.
I remember in Carrier's book, he does bring up a few references about people trying to explain where does the name Nazareth, Nazarene come from, because people have noted, I think the oldest source he mentions noting this was about a century ago.
What else would you say besides he would be a Nazarene? A Nazarethite? A Nazarite? That wouldn't be Nazarite. That's a Nazarite vowel. What else would you say?
Well, for example, if you wanted to say someone was from Athens, how would you say it in English if you were from Athens?
Athenian.
Exactly. That sort of Ian, that sort of suffix
Nazarene.
at the end is how you...
So Nazarene, you think it would be Nazarene?
I'd have to double check the exact form of it, if it would be like Nazarenos, so it'd be like Athenios, but my memory on that exactly there is fuzzy at the moment. The thing is, it's a really strange way to say this is a city designation in that construction. It's also weird because actually, like, the spelling of Nazareth or the word Nazarene, it has like different variant spellings throughout the Gospels. It's actually a little bit strange as well as, and also there's in the various commentaries from the Christians themselves about what Nazarene means is debated. You find like all sorts of references about different groups interpreting Nazarene differently, according to Irenaeus. He, of course, mostly puts it with a bunch of heretics, but that's what Irenaeus would do.
Yeah.
It's like I say, it's one of those weird things. It's like I say, it's an oddity, not a proof of one thing or the other.
I'll have to look into that. I'm going to ask some people about that who know the Greek and ask them if that's what they think. But it's
an
interesting point. It's an interesting point.
Yeah, I will say it's not that you can't claim. You can't say this doesn't mean someone from Nazareth. I'm saying it's not the normal way of how you would do it with Greek grammar. So,
yeah.
And the fact that it's abnormal means it needs an explanation. It can't just be hand-waved.
Interesting. Paul Kickling, thank you for another super chat. Appreciate it. By the way, if I look like I'm not like being grateful for these super chats, I'm just a little out of it, just a little bit of a headache. That's all. Thank you everybody for the super chats. I really appreciate it. Can't express it any more than I. Thank you, Paul, because this is like the second or third maybe that you dropped tonight. We don't question scientific development, but spiritual knowledge has to come from out of nowhere. Hypocrisy. Tanakh even says it's a slow dissemination. Yeah.
Well,
what do you think?
I question scientific developments as a part of my job.
That's true. That's true.
I mean, the whole reason we actually do develop it is because of the questioning.
That's the whole point of science, is to keep,
Yeah.
The whole point.
Yeah, I mean, heck, even like modern evolutionary theory isn't the same as what Darwin said 150 years ago. So I really don't know what's being meant there. And as for spiritual knowledge, I would claim no one has spiritual knowledge because knowledge means justified true beliefs, and no one has been able to justify anything about spiritual stuff except, I would claim, the atheists who say there isn't such a realm.
Yeah.
So we're pretty far apart on this point, Paul. I think we'd have to have a very separate discussion.
Well, Paul has another super chat right after this. So thank you very much for that one. You don't understand the mythicism of Christianity if you think Christ cannot be in two different centuries. Christ comes infinitely forever as Platonic knowledge. Ooh, that's interesting. What are you going to say to me now? Got you. Who, me or you? Is it you? I think it's you.
Well, what I'm going to say is, Paul, I'm starting to worry that you're Ralph Ellis and now you have a time-traveling Jesus. And we don't want to go down this route, okay? This leads to bad places.
By the way, remember when I was challenging Ralph the first time when I had him on?
Yeah,
and,
the whole Isa thing?
I showed him the Assisi thing, the pharaoh from Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
I found his tomb when I was in Egypt.
Oh.
Pharaoh Assisi. It's in Saqqara. It's a little tomb outside of one of the pyramids.
If only I could have a little tomb.
Yeah. So I was right. It's not too far from Joseph's pyramid, step pyramid. But there was some crazy shit out there. But anyway,
All right.
I got videos coming on that, so let's keep moving.
All
We
right.
have been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
I do. Oh, let's see what else we got. There's a lot of comments. That's it. Okay, so
Cool.
That's the last super chat. Now, is there anything else that we didn't get into yet that you wanted to hash out?
I think there's one last thing, because when I split my blog up into sections discussing your video, I said, here's the stuff that's good, here's the stuff that's kind of middling.
The rank
Raglan
Raglan thing, right? The rank Raglan thing, right?
And I was going to get to the stuff that I thought was poorly argued and was just not good. And was relating to how you were trying to approach or critique the use of the Raglan mythotype. So again, let's let the audience know what this is all about. What's a rank Raglan? Can you buy that at Walmart? No. So rank is for Otto Rank, who was an early mythology student who was also trying to use Freudian psychoanalytics to explain old myths. And the Raglan part comes from Lord Raglan, and as the name suggests, English dude with tons of money, so he can just sit around all day and read dusty books and come up with hypotheses. The thing is that these two guys, mostly separately, then were coming up with what they were seeing were patterns in the stories told by great heroes from stories, especially from the ancient Mediterranean world. And the system in particular of these 22 features in common comes from Lord Raglan. He bases it primarily off of King Oedipus. And in these 22 points, you have all these things that, sometimes don't seem too incredible, like the person's father was a king. That's not too incredible. On the other hand, he was said to be the son of a god, that he had a mysterious death on top of a hill. Things start get a little bit weirder and stranger. And the thing that Raglan noted was that this pattern of 22 points seemed to fit to a lot of different figures. It not only fit well with the story of Oedipus Rex, but also for other various Greek gods like Zeus, Dionysus, other legendary figures like Pelops, and so on. All these other mythical characters. Now, Raglan himself didn't apply it to Jesus. Later, folklorists did, and Jesus on this scale also scores super high. Basically, it's about as high as anyone else on the list. And so Carrier basically says, hey, this looks like an interesting pattern that if you look at all the folks who score at least score more than half of the points on this list, they all seem to be mythical. Jesus is in there as well, so this would put him in a pattern where Jesus would be exceptional. Therefore, this leads to his prior probability of Jesus being historical to be low, because he looks more like these mythical people rather than historical people. That's the basic outline premise of what the whole rank Raglan mythotype is supposed to be used in this argument. Now,
right.
What Neil wanted to do was say, actually, there are historical people that meet more than half of the criteria, and therefore Carrier's probabilities based on that are not justified. And then I pushed back because the sources that I found Neil to use were not reliable, and in some ways should have screamed out and said, this is not good. And the example that stood out the most to be ridiculous was
the Trump one.
Yeah, the Trump one, because
I even said the Trump one probably is debatable, because I thought that one was kind of
But here's the thing. But here's the thing. Whether that's debatable, and honestly it's not, but we'll talk about that. The fact that that is in that list, and we are supposed to treat seriously the claim that Trump meets 20 of the 22 criteria there, that he actually meets all the criteria that Jesus did, including Trump dying a mysterious death when the dude isn't even dead, just should make you stop and say, wait a minute.
All right.
This can't be reliable.
That one you got me on.
Yeah.
But Alexander the Great, Augustus, Napoleon, these are people who meet the requirements.
Well, there are definitely things about, like, say, Caesar Augustus that are in the list, but he doesn't get more
just
than
half. Just in Suetonius alone, I think you can get to half. I think we can get there. Want to look at the list?
Well, do you want to do... Actually, you were actually making the most hay about Alexander, so how about we stick with that, because that's the one you
all
seem
right,
to know
Alexander. Okay. Where's... Can you just give me the list Let's go from
let
from
me see
1
if
to
I can
22.
find it somewhat quick. I say somewhat quick because I don't have
It's
quick
just gonna be
eyes.
quick off the top of our heads because I really don't have time to. I
Yeah,
gotta do some editing tonight.
Doobie 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 doo. This is what happens when you don't have the page open already.
No, it's okay. Take your time. Take your time.
I just don't want to have a lot of dead air.
Yeah.
All right, so like I say, this thing is called the Raglan mythotype. So those of you out in Radio Land can also Google or Wikipedia this so you can look at the list for yourselves to make sure that we're not just making things up. Well, I might be making up a little bit. Hint, hint. Let's see. Page. Oh, I just looked at it. 229. Okay, start there. Aha. Okay, so here is the list. You'll find the list in different orders elsewhere, but here's the basic things. The 22 features are: the hero's mother is a virgin, his father is a king or the heir of a king, the circumstances of a conception are unusual, he is reputed to be the son of a god, an attempt is made to kill him while he's a baby, to escape which he is spirited away from those trying to kill him. He is reared in a foreign country by one or more foster parents. We are told nothing of his childhood. On reaching manhood, he returns to his future kingdom. He is crowned, hailed, or becomes king. He reigns uneventfully, that is, without wars or natural catastrophes. He prescribes laws, loses favor with the gods or his subjects. He is driven from the throne or city, meets with a mysterious death, dies atop a hill or high place. His children, if any, do not succeed him. His body turns up missing, yet he still has one or more holy sepulchres. Yeah, there's
let's
a few
start
more
with the first one. Let's do one at a time. First
Yeah.
one is. Say it again.
Hero's mother is a virgin.
Now, this one I can say you can check because his mother doesn't have any children yet. Alexander's not born yet. She is impregnated by a miracle serpent that comes in her room and gets her pregnant, and then Alexander's the son. I think you have a virgin birth here.
You definitely have a birth that is exceptional. So, for example, criteria 4, he's reputed to be the son of a god, that his conception is unusual. Criteria 3, he would meet those. He meets 3 and 4, but 1 is specifically the mother's virginity, and that's never established.
I don't think it is. But I wonder if you could. There's another text that says that she was a virgin before Alexander.
None that I know of.
I think she was. I think he might not be the oldest though. Actually, let me just look this up. Yeah. I think he was. I think she.
But
that's
the key thing though is we needed an actual declaration that Olympias, Alexander's mother, was actually a virgin before Alexander was conceived.
Do you really think that Philip of Macedon would wed somebody who's not a virgin?
Well, the key thing, though, is Philip could have had sex with her already at some point. That tends to happen on the wedding night in old cultures.
Yeah, you're right. You'd think that would happen, but
yeah.
So
and you don't necessarily conceive the first time, and as someone who's wanting to have kids,
let's cross that one off. Okay, let's go to the next one.
All right. His father is a king or heir to a king. Oh yeah, definitely. Philip of Macedon, king.
There's
that's definitely a check. Circumstances of conception are unusual. We definitely have stories about that. Yep.
2.
Reputed to be son of a god. Absolutely.
3.
Attempt is made to kill him when he is a baby.
Yes. 4. Yes.
Wait.
In fact, I'll show it to you right now. Philip of Macedon does not want to have the child. He's gonna kill He's gonna kill the baby until he gets an oracle from Ammon that says, No. This is God's son. I put him in here. Keep the child. And then he says, okay, I will. That's in the text.
But then that's literally
Greek
no attempt was made.
But
no attempt was made then.
But it's thought about. Should we read the text?
But here's the thing. Thinking about something isn't actually attempting it. And also, note the next criteria is to escape the assassination attempt. He is spirited away from those trying to kill him. But no attempt is actually made to kill him, and he doesn't have to escape from it.
I want to go back to the text. There might be something in there that I'm not seeing right now that I've seen before.
Yeah, I remember what you're talking about. But I think
I checked those off.
Well, also, mind you, in the Alexander Romance, Philip
in the Alexander Romance, Philip does not want to have the child because he thinks that she had the child through adultery.
Mm-hmm.
And then a miracle intervenes, and he says, No, have the child. You know what I'm saying? And then
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what happened. I can't remember. It's been a while since I read it. But there is something like that. The circumstances are certain like that.
But there's no actual attempt to kill. I checked. Like, nobody pulls out a knife. No one has to escape from this happening.
Right. I mean, that's so specific, though.
Yeah. Well, that's why I say we want to actually follow these criteria as written. Okay, not how can we stretch them?
Right, but how does this happen with some of these other Oedipuses and stuff? Is it exactly the same way?
Oh, actually, yeah, because Oedipus, he is originally going to be killed by his parents because of a prophecy, but instead they have him, well, what they originally were going to do was they were going to have Oedipus as a baby live out be exposed to basically just die out in the wilderness, but he is actually discovered by a shepherd, and then the shepherd takes him in, so that way the child actually lives. That's actually what happens.
Yeah. So is that an attempt though, or is that?
Yeah. They wanted the baby to die because they said there was a prophecy, and they put the baby out to die of exposure.
But isn't that not the same when Philip Macedon wanted his baby to die?
But here's the thing: they actually did put the baby out to die of exposure. They actually did attempt.
I'm not okay. I'll go back and look at that again. But
yeah.
Okay, let's keep going.
And of course, if we want to really compare this to our friend JC, very direct attempt to kill Jesus by Herod the Great.
Yeah. Let's keep going. What's the next one?
All right. So, to escape, he's spirited away from those trying to kill him. Like I said, that doesn't happen to Alexander. He's reared in a foreign country by one or more foster parents. No, he grows up in Macedon, his kingdom.
Here, check this out, though. The Alexander romance tells you the story from the perspective of Egypt, not Macedon. Egypt is the true home of Alexander. He's actually buried in the tomb of Nectanebo, who is his real father. It tells you that Philip Macedon isn't the father, it's Nectanebo. Nectanebo gets kicked out of the land of Egypt and sent to Macedon to sort of like father the son and bring. And then when Alexander returns back to Egypt, it says the prophecy of you will leave as an old man and return as a young man. So Alexander becomes Nectanebo. He takes on the legacy of the last pharaoh of Egypt.
Here's the thing. You're talking about legacies, but we're talking about what happens to Alexander himself. And no one says that Alexander is Nectanebo.
Right, but he's not. Those aren't his. Philip is not his real father. He's basically spirited off to another land.
But he's not. Mind you, Alexander grows up in the same place he's born, in Macedon.
Right, but he's Nectanebo. There was a prophecy in the beginning of the book.
Is Nectanebo Alexander? Are they the same person?
It is. It's sort of a continuation of a spirit. Yes.
Then no, that's not Alexander. That's Nectanebo.
I get what you're saying.
And also, I also checked in the story when Alexander learns this prophecy himself and looks at a statue of Nectanebo. He doesn't say, "Oh, that's me." He says, "That is my real father." So he still identifies Nectanebo as a different entity than himself.
Right, but the prophecy is about himself, though, which was originally about Nectanebo.
If you want to argue that way, then you would be saying it's not Alexander who's reared in a foreign land; it's Nectanebo who's reared in a foreign land.
Yeah, but when Alexander returns to Egypt, he's returning home.
So that would then count to the story of Nectanebo, not Alexander, because you were saying
it is complicated. You're right. It's
not just complicated. It's just absurd because we're now saying two people is one people, and this is not the Trinity. That is not what this criteria system is about.
Well, that's how myths are written. So
it might be how myths are written, but I'm just saying like how this arc of story works. It's not that we're just going to take one person and then have a prophecy so that way they're actually another person as well, and they're two people at the same time.
All right, what's the next one?
All right, next one. We are told nothing of his childhood. That's also false. We know quite a bit about Alexander's childhood. Even in the Alexander romance, we learn about him taming horses. We know about what teachers he has.
Yeah.
On reaching manhood, he returns to his future kingdom. Well, he doesn't return to it.
Yeah, he returns. He returns to Egypt.
But he doesn't come.
That's his future kingdom. But that's the whole point of the beginning of the story, is to tell you that Alexander is an Egyptian.
But here's the thing. Alexander isn't an Egyptian. He's born in Macedon. This is where
we defer. We defer on some of these key details. That's why we're not getting the same
this
number.
is just straight up factual. What story says that Alexander was...
He gets buried in
Mind
Egypt.
you, though, it says he returns
That's his kingdom.
It says returns to.
But that's the whole point of the prophecy. You
But here's
will
the thing.
leave as an old man and return as a young boy.
But now
This
you're
is
again
your
claiming
true home.
Nectanebo and Alexander are the same person, and that's absurd.
I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is
You
that
just
when he
did.
returns,
You're saying what happens to Nectanebo is what happens to Alexander.
no, well, I'm saying that Nectanebo sort of prophesies the coming of Alexander. Sort of
Well,
is like a
prophesying the
forerunner.
coming of Alexander is
It's
not
kind
the
of
same
like a
thing.
John, it's sort of like a John the Baptist in a weird way. It's like it's a forerunner.
But that's still not the same thing as what's being said here. This is not Alexander returning to his kingdom.
That's what the text is trying to say, though. That's what I think.
It's definitely trying to be very pro-Egyptian.
Listen,
Absolutely.
people who are watching this right now, go read the text and leave a comment.
Oh, by the
on
way,
what
when
you
we're
guys
talking
think.
about the text, the Alexander romance,
Greek
when we say
Alexander
you're reading the
romance.
text, there is a really complicated manuscript tradition, but there is a good website that actually shows like the Greek version, a Syriac version. You can compare side by side.
Get the Penguin edition. It tells you all the manuscripts in which even the chapters you're on, it'll have an I or a J or an A, so you know where you're at with the manuscripts. But yeah. But that's all the stuff that we've been discussing are from the earlier manuscripts, by the way. All the stuff.
Yeah. But again, it is again worth noting. Nectanebo in the story is Alexander's true father.
Yeah.
But that means that Alexander is still born in Macedon, and that is where he grows up, and that is where he gets his kingdom, and then from there conquers the rest of the known world.
True, but it's the legend is coming out of Egypt. It's a Ptolemaic.
That's irrelevant to what's actually in these criteria. We only need to stick with what actually are these points.
I don't think it is. I think that's a fair point.
All right.
Let's go to the next one.
All right. So reaching manhood. Okay. Next one is he is crowned, hailed, or becomes king. Oh, that's a given. That's definitely a given.
Next one.
He reigns uneventfully.
That's a fact. He only reigns for what? Not even a decade.
Well, no, it says he reigns uneventfully without wars or national catastrophes. His entire
is that what it says?
War.
Oh,
yes.
Is that what it says? Okay. Yeah. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
He prescribes laws. Yeah, I think so, as a king.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
He loses favor with the gods or his subjects? Not really.
No. His subjects, though. Because he does have a fight with one of his big. He has a falling out with one of his generals. He has to kill him by accident, and then he mourns over him. He has a falling out. It's in Persia, and then his own people kill him because they're jealous of how he's treating the Persians instead of the Greeks. So he does have a falling out of his own people. That's a check mark. Yes.
Wait. Where does it say that Alexander was killed?
Alexander gets poisoned.
That's one of the allegations. Yes, but that isn't that his subjects have turned away from him. That's some guy poisoned him.
Sent by a Macedonian. I can't remember the guy's name right now. It's coming to me. It starts with a C.
I'm not going to remember off the top of my head, but here's a way of comparing, or here's a way of checking if he fits this criteria. Let's see how this originally applied to Oedipus Rex in the story that we have. Because
what about the big when they turn on him in India when he wants to keep going and all his people turn on him,
but they still stick with him. He agrees to them to return to India, but they don't throw him into the Ganges River or something.
Right, but
they convince him to change his mind. That's very different than losing favor with his subjects.
Yeah, but I think you could say with the people who. It just depends on how many subjects. It doesn't say how many subjects.
Well, like I say, the best way of doing this is to compare how this happens in other myths that we're trying to say this fits in the criteria to. So again, this comes from the story of Oedipus Rex. And in that story, that because, spoiler alert, Oedipus Rex had accidentally killed his father, married his mother, and had children with his mother, and the gods are sending plagues to Thebes, and eventually Oedipus has to abdicate the throne because he's discovered just what he did, and he's so distraught by it. And so that's how he loses favor with both the gods and his subjects and is no longer king of Thebes. So that's an example of losing favor with the subjects and the gods. That sort of thing doesn't happen to Alexander. He basically has his subjects until the day he dies.
Yeah, but he does lose favor with Macedonian royals. That's who sends out to kill him.
But that's not this. That's like, for example, that's not what happens with the Jesus story. That's not what happens with the Oedipus story. This criteria is much more. He loses favor not with like a couple dudes. This is basically he gets kicked out of office in a sense.
I still think there's a case to be made there. I don't know.
You wouldn't want to make this so broad, because anytime a person disagrees with you, you match the hero criterion. That's a stretch.
Yeah, but it's not a stretch though. He's losing favor with the people who sent him on the road to begin with.
But here's the thing, though. Okay, let's put it this way. Donald Trump probably has lost some favor with some of his fans, but I don't think you would say he has completely lost favor with his subjects. It seems like if he runs for president again, he's going to get the nomination. Some people have said no more to Trump, but that doesn't mean he's lost favor with his subjects by a long shot.
Well, I guess we disagree on that one, but let's go to the next one.
All right. So he's driven from the throne or city. No, he dies in Babylon.
No, he does. That's true. He doesn't get driven. Go ahead.
Okay. He meets with a mysterious death. Not really, not like it does for, like, say, Jesus, dying on top of a hill with lightning, or like with the sun being blotted out and the moon turning to blood.
Mysterious death is the definition of Alexander's death.
He dies of poison. That's not a mysterious... Well, here's the thing. Again, let's compare this to other deaths, and in particular, the mysterious deaths of people like Romulus or like Jesus, where
he doesn't know how he died. The people don't know how he dies.
Like I say, the way of understanding this criteria is to see how it's being applied in the other places. And so, like, when Jesus dies, for example, like, the tombs open and dead saints come out, the sun stops shining, and all these other super miraculous things are happening. None of that happens with Alexander's death.
I think there is something like that in one of the manuscripts. There is something like that.
We can double check that later.
All
right, next criteria: he dies atop a hill or high place. Not really, no.
I'm not sure. I can't remember that part. I don't even have my own list here.
Yeah, best I remember, he literally dies in bed surrounded by his generals.
Well, it's out in the open though. It's out in like the field.
Yeah, if it's in a field, then definitely it's not on top of a hill.
Yeah, so I'm not really sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Death of Alexander is great.
Okay, his children, if any, do not succeed him. That's true. His children don't become the next king. His body turns up missing. We know where his body goes. Eventually, of course, it's stolen and such, but it ends up in Alexandria.
Say that again?
So one of the criteria is his body turns up missing. We know his body gets stolen
yeah, this is check off automatically.
No.
His body goes missing. His body's being sent back to Macedon, and then it gets rerouted down to Egypt.
So they know exactly where it is. That it's not missing.
But that's literally like, that's the definition of his body's gone missing.
If you know where it is, it's not missing. If I know where my keys are, they're not missing.
Yeah, do you think the Macedonians knew where it was?
Yeah, in Alexandria. That's where they was taken to.
I don't think it was taken to Alexandria. I think it was taken somewhere else.
That's like where, like, Julius Caesar came and things like that. You pay homage to Alexander and his tomb.
No, that's where it stays. That's where it does get eventually.
Yeah, so it's not missing.
Yeah, but it's not going to where it's supposed to go.
That's not the same thing as this says. It says his body turns up missing. That is gone. But it's not gone. We know exactly where... The story tells us exactly where his body goes.
All right, what happens to Oedipus then?
With Oedipus, I forget exactly how he goes, but we definitely know how it goes for, say, Jesus. We definitely know how it goes for Romulus.
In this story, as you're reading the story, you know what happens to Oedipus. It's other people in the story who don't know what happens to Oedipus, just like in the story of Alexander.
Well, here's the thing. The people in the story do know what happens to Alexander. They know his body is stolen and is taken to Egypt.
They don't know.
And we know from historical records where it had been for centuries, and people like Julius Caesar came to pay homage to his grave.
Yeah, that's after the war was fought. That's after it's all said and done. But here's the thing.
They're coming to his body where he was buried. Now compare that to the empty tomb story for Jesus, where the body's just gone.
Yeah, but you want to know something even crazier? His body's missing right now.
But it was not... here's the thing, though. At the time of the Alexander romance, like where all these legends are being written up, that isn't part of it. Where the Alexander romance is written, it's the case that everyone knows where his body is.
So you're saying it has to... What matters is after it's all said and done?
Here's the key thing. In this, what we care about are these stories. And in this story, in like the Alexander romance, they know where his body is.
Read what the criteria says. I just want to hear what it says.
His body turns up missing.
That's what happens. His body turns up missing. It doesn't say it's lost forever.
When? No,
but that's not what the criteria says.
I don't know.
His body turns up missing. Yes, it's found later, but his body turns up missing when it's on its way to Macedonia.
It doesn't go missing because, again, they know exactly where it is. It was stolen and taken by the Ptolemies to go to Egypt. That's not missing. That's taken.
But that's you can't know exactly where something is if you don't have it in your possession.
I mean, literally, they built a giant opulent tomb to hold Alexander for the whole world to see. This is where Alexander's body is.
That's where
and it's a
he
holy
ends
relic.
up. That's where he ends up, though.
Which means it's not missing.
But now it is, though, so it doesn't matter.
It's not missing during the time of these stories.
The point I'm trying to make is his body ends up missing for a period of time. Then it's found.
That's not what it says. It says his body goes missing.
That's all it says, right?
His
body goes missing. Turns up missing. That's what happened.
But it didn't turn up missing.
Oh, it gets found later on by the Ptolemies.
It's not found later. It's not like it fell off the train and then somebody actually picked it up. It was stolen. It was always known where it was.
I would check that one off. I don't know.
Also, and here's the other thing. Again, let's compare this to all the translation stories.
Yeah, let's compare. Well, let's compare
like for Romulus or for
myths.
Jesus or for Asclepius, where their bodies are translated to heaven. That's the body turning up missing.
And then come back down sometimes.
The body of, well, when, like, for example, Romulus comes, he's basically coming in some sort of heavenly being. And the other key thing is so his body turns up missing, and this also relates to the next thing, yet he has one or more holy sepulchres. So there's no body, and yet there's a tomb for the body. That's true for Jesus. That ain't true for Alexander.
No, Alexander has a tomb, yeah.
And with a body in it.
But he does get switched into another coffin.
That's some sort of later legend to explain why the body isn't known today.
No, but I think there's a text. There's a Ptolemaic text that talks about the tomb of Alexander being in Nectanebo's tomb. He got switched.
Whether that's true or not, it's still the case that there is a tomb for Alexander, and that's where his body was kept for centuries, where people came and visited and honored at the corpse of the hero.
All right. Is that the last one?
No, we still got a couple more, unfortunately.
Go ahead.
So I'll just go quickly. Before taking a throne or a wife, he battles and defeats a great adversary, such as a king, dragon, giant, or wild beast.
True. That's 100% fact about Alexander. He doesn't take a wife till he gets to Bactria. That's where he takes his first wife, and he battles a dragon before that too. A dragon, literally. He literally battles a dragon.
Well, this is saying before he takes the throne, he does the battle, the dragon battling.
Before he takes a throne or a wife.
I'm going to have to double check on that just because my memory is poor on there. But all right, last two criteria.
What does it say? So just read it again real quick.
Okay, yeah. Before taking a throne or a wife, he battles and defeats a great adversary.
Check.
All right, last two, his parents are related to each other, not as far as I know.
I don't know about that.
He marries a queen or princess related to his predecessor. No.
No, because his predecessor would be... Yes, his predecessor is Darius. He takes Darius' throne. Darius is related to this queen. What's her name? The queen of the... It's one of his daughters, basically. So yeah, that's check.
No. Alexander, the only person he marries is Roxana, who's from Bactria.
Roxanne. Yes, Roxanne.
But
if you look up Roxanne...
But she wasn't Persian. She was a Bactrian. She was from a different tribe altogether.
No. Hold on a second. Hold on. Let me look this up. I'm pretty sure this is... Queen Roxanne. I'm pretty sure she's related to Darius.
Well, actually, I'm going to read this more broadly because it says queen or princess related to his predecessor. Maybe that predecessor can be also for other kingdoms he conquered. So I'm going to say yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty safe to say.
Okay. So if we go through and add things up of the things we agreed on, I think we're talking like 10 of the points.
Well, we just agreed on a few, like 4. I think you and I were split on like 4, at least. We didn't agree on like 4 of those.
Well, that's what I said. I think the things we did agree on, it was something like 10.
The ones we agreed on, but then there was 4 of them that I contested that I still think that I have pretty strong.
But the thing is, none of the ones you have are factual. You have to stretch these criteria and
not really.
the meanings of these things.
Not in my
You
opinion.
kept saying you have to basically have the story of Nectanebo become the story of Alexander and treat them as the same person, and I think that is definitely not fitting.
I ended up taking that one off. I ended up saying let's go off. That was not one of the 4.
All right, so to quickly go through the ones where we agreed on, father was a king, yes. Circumstances unusual of his birth, yes. Reputed to be son of a god, yes. That's 3. Then the next one we agreed on, he's crowned or hailed king, definitely that. Prescribes laws, yes.
You know what? Fine. Let's just say you're right. There's 10. I don't even care because
Six.
you know what all this is? All of this talk is just, and I even said this in my video. The only thing that really matters to me is that humans who lived get mythologized.
Mm-hmm.
It's not abnormal.
Yeah, that's true.
Now,
Absolutely.
if you want to say that Raglan is very specific on certain things, you're right. Sure, you're right. Very specific. You could also make a list of very specific things about failed messianic leaders, like Simon of Perea, Judas of Galilee, and I could put Jesus finally on that list, and then I would take all these other myths like Dionysus off that list. You could do that too,
right?
So
but then we'd have to actually do the counts.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. And so,
but I'm saying we'd actually have to do those counts and actually then compare. But right now, we're just saying we could do this. We need to actually do this. And so, for example, what Carrier has actually done is actually done the count. And here's the thing he noticed is that we have we're just looking at his book here. Yeah, he has 15 examples of mythical people that meet more than half of these criteria. And there are no historical people with more than half. And that's an interesting result.
And well, I think there are some people. Like I said, I think Alexander.
Well, the thing is, though, the source you used, unfortunately, is utter garbage, and I have to be explicit about that because the person who is giving that to you cannot tell the difference between actual scholarship and parody. Who is telling you that somehow a living person had a mysterious death? Who literally went and took a book written by the same person who writes a hagiography as a joke for Kim Jong-un is also telling us that Jesus or that Trump is actually Jesus, even though that's not even what the book says. You just have to say, okay, this person does not provide reliable information. If you want to say anyone does meet more than half these criteria, you're going to have to do your own research. You can't trust this person.
I want to talk to that person again just to hone in on some of these.
Yeah.
To get some maybe there's some information that I'm not looking at. But
maybe
here's the thing.
As I pointed out, though, this person literally cited parody scholarship to prove that Abe Lincoln was fitting all these criteria.
Yeah.
That is not a reliable source for someone who literally hasn't checked to see that something is parody.
Yeah, but Abraham Lincoln was mythologized.
Not to the level that he fits all 22 criteria.
Maybe not.
No, he didn't. I mean, that's the thing. Literally, if I had to read what this source. Okay, so again, I mentioned this in my blog. I have links to it so people can look this up. This was a pamphlet written by a person named Francis Utley in the 1960s, if memory serves. And he's basically showing that if you were a folklorist at that time and you were using these criteria way too slipperily and making them overly expansive, then you end up arguing that Abraham Lincoln was a myth. And this falls into a tradition of other scholars showing if you use these sorts of connections and do this sort of parallelomania, then Napoleon was a sun god and never existed. And you get absurd conclusions like that. The whole point of that was to show if you do crap folklore studies, these are the results you get. So to take someone and saying, don't do crap folklore studies to prove here's what folklore studies actually show means you haven't checked the source or understood it.
Yeah.
And that's a big failing of any sort of scholarship. If you literally don't read the source you cite and then say it claims these amazing things.
Yeah, I don't really care about Rick Raglan. I think it's a dumb. I just think it's. I just wanted to make the point that people.
Well, no, it's not dumb. It's actually used in folklore studies.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it is.
So I don't know why you called it dumb.
Well, my whole point was that humans get mythologized.
But the key thing, though, and the whole reason this even mattered is the observation that, yes, humans do get mythologized, but when it comes to that level on the scale, to be that high, there aren't any other actual humans that high on the scale, and that is.
But it's not impossible that someone can be that mythologized.
Well, that's not the claim. That it's impossible.
With the case of a guy who has not just 4 gospels, but like extra tens and dozens of gospels written about him. Yeah. I'm not surprised that he makes the list.
Well, here's the thing, though. He would be the only human ever to have done it.
And it makes sense. I seriously doubt that.
But no, that's the key thing. That there aren't any other counterexamples from all these stories from antiquity of a historical person getting more than half of these points. And that's the thing that's interesting.
Like I said, I still think Alexander and Augustus both make that list.
Well, we just talked about Alexander, and the most you agreed with was 10 points, and that's not more than half.
No, I think I had 14. That was my number. 14.
That was your count, but you also said you retracted a whole bunch of them.
Did you really want to go over it real quick? Because I'm pretty sure I have at 14.
You had it 14 in your video, yes. But then you just also said you retracted a bunch of them.
Let's go through it right now. Just go through tell me which one. Ready? Just start from the beginning. Let's go to the end. This is the last thing we're doing. Then I gotta go.
All right. Mother is a virgin? No.
No.
Father is king or heir of a king? Absolutely.
Yes.
Circumstances unusual of his birth? Yes. Reputed to be the son of a god? Yes. Attempt made to kill him while he's a baby? None.
I said yes for this one.
You said yes, but there's no actual example.
Well, I think his father doesn't want to have him.
This is factual. There is no attempt on his life.
Well, this is why I said you think there's 10. I think there's 14. That's all I'm trying to do.
This is a factual statement. Did someone try to kill Alexander? Like, actually try?
He thought about it.
Did he try?
I'd say yeah.
So thinking about it is the same as doing it?
I mean, he had to have an angel. He had to have a God come and tell him.
But then he didn't do it.
But he had to have a God tell him not to do it.
But he didn't do it. The criteria is an attempt is made on his life.
I'm going to read the text. Want to read the text?
It doesn't matter what the text says if he's not actually attempted to be killed.
Yeah, but it sounds pretty bad to me.
But it's not the same thing. This is like I say, this is the example of what happens with the crap folklorists that other people are saying you can't do this to the criterion and expect there to be useful results. And let's also put it another way. In a court of law, thinking about violent things and attempting to do violent things are very different.
Yeah.
If I'm angry with someone, that is very different from me actually trying to attack them with a knife.
So one day, Olympias' belly grew until one day she said to Nectanebo, "What shall I say if Philip comes home and finds you pregnant?" "Have no fear, queen," replied the wizard. "Ammon will come to your aid in the following way. He will appear to Philip in a dream and relate to him all that has occurred, so that Philip will not be able to make any accusation against you." In this way, Olympias was taken in by magic powers of Nectanebo. Then Nectanebo took a sea hawk, cast a spell on it, and he instructed it in all things he wished to tell Philip. And when it was fully prepared by black art, sent it off to fly to Philip. The sea hawk came by night to where Philip was and spoke to him in a dream. When Philip saw the hawk speaking to him, he woke up in a great disturbance of mind at once for a certain Babylonian dream interpreter who had a good reputation in described apparition. I saw in a dream some god of great physical beauty with gray hair and gray beard, and he had horns on his temples which looked as if they were of gold, and in his hand he held a scepter. I saw him go into my wife Olympias by night and lie down with her and make love to her. Then the god stood up and said, "Woman, you have conceived a male child who will make you fruitful and avenge the death of his father." Then I saw myself sewing up her body with papyrus fibers and sealing it with my own ring. The ring was of gold with a stone in it, and the stone was engraved with the sun, a lion's head, and a spear. While I watched this, I seemed to see a sea hawk standing beside me, who roused me from the sleep with the beating of his wings. "Tell me, what does this signify?" "Long live King Philip," the dream interpreter replied. "What you saw in the dream is true. The sealing up of the body of your wife is a reliable sign that she is pregnant, for no one seals up an empty vessel, but only one that has something in it. As for your sewing up her papyrus, papyrus grows nowhere but in Egypt. The seed then is of Egyptian origin, see, and not Hubble, but glorious and great fame, as the gold ring indicates. For what is more glorious than gold, and what we can make honors the gods? And the seal portraying the sun, the lion's head, and the spear shows that the child will fight against the peoples like a lion." Damn, this is long. And then it says, I'm trying to find out where Philip's reply is. Some days later, Philip said to Olympias, "You were deceiving me, wife. You were not ravished by God, but some other. You may be sure he will not escape me." Nectanebo took due note. Soon there was a great feast in the palace, and everyone was celebrating with Philip, the king's return. Only King Philip was cast down because of his wife's pregnancy. Suddenly, Nectanebo turned himself into a serpent larger than the previous one and crept into the dining room, hissing in a most fearsome way, so that the very foundations of the palace shook. When those who were dining with the king saw the serpent, they leaped from their palace in fright. But Olympias, who had recognized her special lover, extended her right hand to him. The serpent raised himself up and placed his head on her lap. He coiled himself and lay on her knees, popping his forked tongue in and out to kiss her. which the onlookers took as an indication of the serpent's affection for her. Philip was at the same time annoyed and amazed, and could not take his eyes off the apparition. Suddenly the snake changed into an eagle and disappeared. No one could say where. When Philip had recovered from his shock, he said, "Woman, I have seen a sign of the gods concerned for you, for he came to help you when you were in danger. But I still do not know which god this is, for he appeared to me in the form of Ammon, Apollo, and Asclepius. He made it clear to me when he lay with me," Olympius replied, "that Ammon is the god of all Libya." Then Philip congratulated himself on the god's favor, since the offering of his own wife was to be of a god. Sounds like he was pretty pissed off when he was ready to do something. He said, "Save me." He said, "Save me."
Wait. Nowhere in there you said that Philip was even angry and was going to attack Olympia, let alone Alexander as a baby.
What do you mean? He just said, "Woman, I have seen a sign of the God's concern for you, for he came to help you when you were in danger."
And where did it say that actually anyone was going to be attacking Alexander? There was no statement in anything you read.
You just read
like 3 pages, and nothing said there was an attempt on Alexander's life. Not a statement.
I'll read it again. Some days later, this is after that apparition, Philip said to Olympias, "You were deceiving me. Wife, you were not ravished by a god, but by some other. And you may be sure he will not escape me."
Who is he?
He changed his mind.
Where did it say in there that there is an attempt on Alexander's life? Nothing you read is even related to that.
Yeah, but he's inside of her. He's in her womb.
And so there's no attempt made on either Olympias or on the fetus. So there's no attempt in this story on Alexander's life.
Well, I see it that way. I think it's pretty clear.
Where? Where did it say there's even an attempt?
He literally tells her that you're deceiving me through trickery and magic. And then he says, and a couple paragraphs later, "Wow, the gods really had your back because you were in danger." That's pretty clear.
Where did it say there was an attempt on anyone's life?
Whatever.
Where does it say it?
I just told you.
You didn't. Not anywhere.
Yes, I did.
No. Nowhere. Not in a single place was there even a saying that he was going to do anything violent. The only violence actually being talked about, the only person being talked about as being in danger.
I think it's pretty clear. He gets an apparition, he rejects it, then thinks it's her, then tells her she's in danger and that the God saved her.
This actually sounds much more like the story with Joseph and Mary, where you say Joseph was trying to kill Jesus?
No, because Joseph never said that you were in danger and God saved you.
But he was upset and he was going to divorce his wife until he got an apparition. This sounds much more in that category.
Okay, fine. It's like Jesus. Does that refute my point at all? I don't know.
Yeah, because the criteria is there's an attempt on his life as a baby. And heck, in this story, it's also worth noting, the attempt is made on him when he was a baby. Alexander's not even born yet.
He's in the womb, so.
As I say, if I'm saying what this is saying, there's an attempt on him as a baby. And Alexander's not even born. It's not even possible to have an attempt on his life. And nowhere in there does it say Philip is going to take out a knife and attack Olympias or the fetus or the future child. The only person who that there's an explicit threat towards was the person who impregnated Olympias until the discovery that this was actually some sort of magical being.
Well,
that's literally what you just read.
I put that one on there easily.
I think you're just making the criteria up because this is literally the case. There's no baby being attacked. There's no baby even there to have an attempt on the life.
You have a fetus in danger.
Didn't even say that.
Big time.
Didn't say that even. No, not at one. Not any point that you read. Show me where it says the fetus was in danger.
Let's go to the next one.
All right. Okay, so we just talked about trying to kill. To escape the murder attempt, he is spirited away from those trying to kill him. That doesn't happen. Reared in a foreign country by one or more foster parents. No, he grows up in his home country of Macedon.
His seed is from Egypt, and he returns home later on.
It says he is reared in a foreign country. Alexander is Macedonian. He born in Macedon, and he grows up in Macedon.
That's not what the myth says, though. The myth says he's an Egyptian seed born. Egyptian seed.
It says he's reared in
and
a
then he
foreign
returns
country.
home. Those are the last two that we disagree on right there because they connect. He returns home to Egypt.
Here's how we can tell how this is different.
That's why I have 14, you have 10. I just figured it out. That's why.
Well, here's the thing. Again, let's actually compare. Let's compare this to other stories. When it comes to the story of Oedipus, he is supposed to be the heir to the throne of Thebes. He is then set out to die of exposure in the wilderness. A shepherd comes along and takes him, and he grows up in a different city-state. So that's him being reared in a foreign country by foster parents. If we compare that to Jesus, he has to basically escape to Egypt and grow up there for a while until he can return back to Israel. But even then, he has to go to Nazareth before he can finally come to Jerusalem.
Let me ask you this. According to this story, is Philip of Macedon the father of Alexander the Great?
No.
So he's a foster parent.
Right. It says he's raised by foster parents in a foreign country, but that's not what happens.
When he goes back to Egypt, he's told that he's returning home as a young man.
Where was he born? Where was Alexander born?
He's born in Macedon.
Where does he grow up?
In Macedon.
So he's reared in the same place he's born.
But his seed comes out of Egypt, though.
That doesn't count with this criteria. It says you're raised in a foreign country. You're raised in a different place than you were born in.
Yeah, but I think what the text is trying to say is that he's from
Don't
Egypt.
tell me what it's trying to say. This is what the story actually says.
But this matters because that's why they have the funeral games. The Ptolemies are trying to make claim that they
What does the story say? Do not make it say something else.
The story says that he's the Egyptian.
Does it say he was raised in a country different than where he was born?
Well, it says that he's raised in a country that's not where he's from. He's an Egyptian.
Where was he born?
He's born as a baby in Macedon.
And where does he grow up?
In Macedon.
So he's reared in the same place he was born, not a foreign country.
But that's not his true home, though. According to this story,
there's nothing in here about true homes. He is raised in the same place he's born.
That's the whole point of the story, is that he's an Egyptian.
It doesn't matter what that story is. It's what the criteria are.
Well, that's okay. That's
again. Here's the different examples. Again, with Oedipus, he's born in Thebes, but he grows up in the countryside in a different place. Jesus, he's born basically outside of Jerusalem, but he has to basically grow up first in Egypt and then later in the Galilee before he returns to his kingdom in Jerusalem or the Jerusalem area. That's examples of someone who is reared in a foreign country. They were born someplace, and then because of their need to escape as an infant, like Oedipus had to, like Jesus had to, they are then being raised in some other country than from where they came from.
Now, what was the other one that you disagreed with me on that I said it was an easy check?
Let's get through the rest and then we'll see. Because right now I counted 3. We are told nothing of his childhood. That's not going to work.
No, I didn't say that. No.
Yeah. On reaching manhood, he returns to his future kingdom. He doesn't return to it.
I said he did.
But
because I think he returns to his original home in Egypt.
Where was he born? Where was he born?
It doesn't matter. It says he's an Egyptian. It says his seed was Egyptian.
Where was he born? Where was he born?
Macedonian means nothing to the story.
Yes, it is, because that's where he's born.
That's not what the romance is.
He is born, he grows up, and he inherits the throne all from the same place, Macedon.
And then when he goes to the Oracle of Siwa in the desert of Egypt, he's told that he's the son of the god and he's in his true home.
His home, okay, but this is saying he returns to his future kingdom. Guess what? Well, Alexander can't return to his kingdom. He had never been to Egypt before then. This is returning from the place he was kicked out of.
Text actually gives you a prophecy explaining that.
But that's not Alexander. That's Nectanebo. Nectanebo is not Alexander.
But it's just, whatever. All right,
they're not the same person. They're not the same person.
I didn't say he was the same person.
But you require it to be.
It's mythology.
But that's not the story. The story isn't him being Nectanebo.
But the prophecy says, you will leave as an old man. You will leave as an old man. Did Alexander ever leave Egypt as an old man?
Indeed, that's why it's not actually Alex. That's why Jesus.
Right.
That's why Alexander and Nectanebo aren't the same person.
Right, but he tells Alexander, you will leave as an old man and return as a young man.
Are you
never
saying
left.
Alexander is next to Nebo?
No, I'm saying it's mythology.
Then the prophecy is either wrong or it's metaphorical.
No, it's metaphorical, exactly.
Exactly, which means in the story, Alexander doesn't actually return to his kingdom.
All right, let's go to the next one.
All right. He is, let's see, he is crowned, hailed, or becomes king. Oh, definitely. That's a given.
Yeah.
He reigns uneventfully. I would say no. He's got lots of wars through his whole career.
Yeah, fine.
Prescribes laws? Yeah.
Yes.
Loses favor with gods or his subjects? No, he basically is ruling until the end.
Yeah, but he loses favor with his subjects.
When do his subjects kick him off the throne?
Well, he loses favor with one of his greatest allies.
One subject is not all his subjects. It's not him.
And then he
losing
gets
the throne.
poisoned. And then he gets poisoned by the Macedonian royals.
Well, here's the thing. If somebody goes and poisons Joe Biden right now, does that mean the Democrats are against Biden, or one person
somebody
wanted
lost favor? It means someone lost favor with Joe Biden.
Someone, but that's not the same thing as losing
But
control
that's not.
of your
It
subjects.
doesn't say how many. It just says his subjects.
But here's the thing. He doesn't lose favor with his subjects. He is still the king until the day he dies because of poisoning. Allegedly, at least.
This is probably why so many people have problems with Rank Raglan, because it's you can interpret things differently.
No, this is us being strict and literal.
Well,
it's only if we're being hyper flexible can we fit anyone in.
Where's the strict and literal when we're reading Origen? Well, all of a sudden we're interpreting Origin how we want. But when it comes to this,
the whole point of this criteria is for us to see factually which points do people meet and which points do they not meet. This is a straightforward factual question.
But when you have your own people sending for you to get killed because you are now ruling in favor of Persians and not Macedonians anymore, you've lost favor with your subjects.
Did he lose the throne? Was he kicked off the throne?
He gets killed. Gets poisoned.
And is that because his subjects now want him gone, or because one person tried to do a power grab? That's not the same thing.
No, it's not just one person.
Well, we don't know from the story, do we? In fact, we don't even know if he was poisoned. That's just one of the allegations.
That's why it's a mysterious death.
Here's the thing, the mysterious deaths, well, we'll get to that, but that's actually about supernatural events at the death.
But that's not what it says. It just says mysterious death. It doesn't say it has to be magic.
Here's the thing. Again, what you can do to interpret these points is to actually see how are they actually applied.
This is why I think Rank Raglan's not the greatest.
But it's commonly... Wait, hold on. Remember before you said you wanted to stick with the consensus? Well, folklorists use this.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. And I think that there's a good case for 14 of these, easily.
Well, here's the thing. You just said you wanted to crap on the Raglan criteria altogether, and now you're backing up and saying, oh, no, but Alexander fits this. You are now trying to go back and forth and switch goals.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is Rank Raglan is very specific, and yeah, Jesus finds on that list. Because Jesus has so many myths written about him that he's the most mythologized person
Now
ever.
you're moving the goalposts again. Why is it, though?
No, I'm not.
No, you're trying to explain away why is Jesus up there, which is still the fact that only Jesus makes it in this list and it's supposed to be historical.
I don't think he is the only person.
But we haven't found an example yet.
I just gave you mine.
And I've been pointing out over and over again, you're factually wrong.
No, I'm not.
Absolutely.
I'm not.
You told me there's an attempt on Alexander's life as a baby. You showed me not a single example. You didn't even show me Alexander as a baby. In your story, Alexander isn't even born. How can there be an attempt on a baby who's not a baby yet?
He's a fetus. He's in the mother's womb.
Not a baby then. And there's no attempt on his life. There's no one saying, I'm going to kill you. There's no attempt.
I just think it's funny how you're sticking to very specific details when it comes to this. But other texts, we can interpret it and fudge the numbers a little bit.
Well, here's the thing. I'm actually trying to be strict on these criteria, and the other places, I'm looking at what is the total evidence for what was actually like original to the text. And every time I have tried to bring up evidence to my point.
Right. And I think when he gets to Egypt, and he's told by the god of Egypt that I'm your father, this is your kingdom, I think that checks that box. You don't think so for whatever reason. I think it does.
Again, how can he return to Egypt if Alexander's never been to Egypt before?
He's the Egyptian seed. It tells you that.
Is Alexander born in Egypt?
He's not. I told you. We already went over.
So he never returns to Egypt. He first comes to Egypt.
All right. Well, we went around this so many times. The people can decide what they think about this.
Okay, but here's the thing,
we're
though.
not going to agree.
This
We
should
don't
be
agree on this.
straightforwardly and factual.
I think it is.
And here's the thing. I don't actually find other folklorists also giving these high scores to Alexander when I've checked.
I don't. Okay.
So again, if you're trying to say, well, here's what the evidence is, or you're wanting to go into the consensus of the experts, but I'm also pointing out the experts use this criteria that you occasionally just start shitting on. And other experts, when they look at this, they don't actually say Alexander is this high up on the scale as you're alleging.
What, like who?
Well, in particular, when I pulled this from the work of Alan Dundas, who was the first person I remember learning about the Raglan criteria. He was a folklorist, I think, at Berkeley. Wrote a couple different books, including ones on the Bible, and he also started applying the Raglan criteria to Jesus. And in that list of things, he was saying, like, yeah, here's all these gods and heroes, but I don't remember how far up Alexander was up on that list, but he wasn't that high up on the list, and he definitely wasn't as high as Jesus.
Well, I didn't say he was.
Yeah, I understand that. But like I say, and I also remember that the whole point of like some of the parodies that I've mentioned about people overstretching the criteria or the sources they try to use to make people fit this criteria, those were supposed to be examples of bad folkloric studies. That the folklorists were basically saying, if we're crap in using our criteria, we're going to get ridiculous and unuseful results. So we need to be more careful about how we actually are doing this counting, and we should be more strict and methodical in our methods, rather than what sorts of ways can we stretch these things to actually fit the criteria.
Well, yeah, I would say the same thing about every other point mythicists make about stretching facts and data and.
Well, in that case, don't try to do the same thing to try to make Alexander fit something he doesn't fit.
I don't. I think it's solid.
He doesn't return to Egypt. That's a fact.
I'm looking at what the text says.
And he never returned to Egypt. That's a fact. Straight up fact.
Well, that's what the prophecy says. So it's mythology.
Does he actually return to Egypt?
Does he actually return to Egypt? Well, if you go with the prophecy,
yes or no? Yes or no?
If you go with the prophecy, yes.
No, because
that's what the prophecy
not.
Says. Then why would it say he's returning as a young man?
He's returning as vengeance for Nectanebo. It's not literal.
Exactly.
So why are you taking something not literal and saying it's factual?
Because it's mythology.
And this is saying what actually happens to the person. This is not what happens to Alexander.
All right. So I really got to get going. It's real late now.
Okay. All right. I think the entire audience might be also burned out, but maybe we should do some quick closing statements to make sure that we don't want to rip each other's throats out.
Yeah. Go ahead, man. Yeah.
All right. So look what mythicism is doing to us. This is whole lot of hot air to basically even argue about each and every one of these points. And all this sort of debate. Now, I think, of course, having some steam in these debates is reasonable, and also notice that we have not attacked each other in character or anything like that. I hope that we have felt that we've been just attacking ideas, not persons, right?
Yeah.
And that should be us doing our best here. There's going to still be plenty of heat trying to make this argument, but as you can see, to make these arguments one way or the other takes a lot of detailed analysis, a lot of study, and no one should be convinced one way or the other about Jesus being historical or not in one, even 3+ hour video stream.
Right.
We have a lot of research for us all to do, and my big challenge isn't to say mythicism is so obviously right that everyone who disagrees with me is a liar or a lunatic or anything like that. My argument is historicity needs to, I think, respond to the best arguments out there. And in doing that process, it will not simply throw away mythicism. What it will do is make a better historicity. And if Bible scholars can't do that, then we should be treating mythicism as a much more plausible hypothesis than what other Bible scholars have done thus far. So my ultimate argument is we should be having the argument and treating it seriously, because one way or the other, we're going to either come to the conclusion that we can't know, or we're going to come up with an even better version of what is the best theory we can achieve.
Yeah, I'm actually going to agree with you on that. I think mythicism should have a place in the conversation. It's just it just needs to let people have their opinions. Otherwise, like, there's no conspiracy. It really isn't. Like, there's just no conspiracy. Like, nobody's like getting paid by Catholic universities to make sure Jesus is a guy. Like, I don't know, people might think that or not, but with that being said, though, I'll admit this, and I've always pointed this out, that a lot of people really do shit on mythicism as like it's some crazy conspiracy theory. It's very possible that there was no God. Like, that needs to be admitted by pretty much everybody. There's no physical evidence. There's nothing he wrote down. In fact, you got people in the region during that time period writing about the same topics who don't even know who Jesus is. It's like it's not there yet. So that alone, sorry, I'm starting to get all like I feel I'm getting tired. But that alone is enough for somebody to really take this seriously, I think. Like I said, I used to be a mythicist. I think it's more likely that this came from somewhere. Something happened and this all got mythologized. I just think that's the very likely scenario. Nothing supernatural about it. I'm not just agreeing with the text or just blindly accepting faith or anything like that. I'm just going with people who have been doing this for way longer than me, who have way better credentials than me. I'm just going with what they say. I'm listening to what they're saying. I'm not just accepting it. They do make sense. So try to listen to some other perspectives. Try to find the one scholar with the PhD, who got peer reviewed for a couple things here and there, and just refer to him for everything. Get some outside opinions. That's all. And then I think at that point we can have better discussions like this.
Oh, I just agree. You should be only listening to me and everything I say.
Right. But yeah, I'm interested to see what happens after you do. So what are you doing next now? You said.
Yeah, so I'll be heading to SBL. I'm flying out next week. I'll be giving a paper related to the interpretation of the heavenly woman in Revelation 12. It's very similar to a talk I actually did on Gnostic Informant, 9-ish months ago? In another sort of antiquity, YouTube antiquity, I guess. And it will be arguing that there is a better approach of how we can actually derive this story from Old Testament scripture reading, and can help advance the field in understanding where some of the more mysterious imagery from Revelation comes from, and make it just a tiny bit less mysterious.
Yeah. Revelation is, I used to think Revelation was so weird and pagan. And then I started getting into the pseudepigrapha text and all the Christian Sibylline oracle stuff. And then I'm like, okay, it fits in great with that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It's coming out of that vein of thought.
Oh,
so
yeah. When you first read it and you're seeing all these like animal faces floating around and things like that, and you're just like, where are these drugs coming from? Because you're not going to even find those in California. But then you realize, oh, these are just 100,000 different allusions to the Old Testament or other myths going on in Jewish Christian circles at the time. And it goes from, what's he smoking to, oh, okay, I don't want to smoke it, but I at least know what's going on now.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, but there are still some mysteries in there are still mysteries in Revelation, and I'm going to try to add my tiny bit to help resolve them.
I'll be looking forward to that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't think there's any more super chat after that. So we're ready to rock, and I've had fun. I like these debates. I wish I, felt more hydrated, but we're good though. So thanks for coming on here, and you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over you.